Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Price Formation Enhancements. On behalf of the ISO, we welcome you to this working group. My name is Brenda Marquez, representing the ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group, and I'll be helping facilitate and taking notes for today's meeting. I'm also joined by James Frederick, who's our lead policy developer, Danny Johnson, market design sector manager, Juan Patraga, who's an account manager and also will be facilitating this call, and Mike Collider, who's the president for Atlantic Economics. The presentation and other materials can be found at the Price Formation Enhancements website page. I went ahead and added a link to the chat. We also will have this call recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, so we encourage comments to be both professional and respectful. Please try to refrain from repeating anything that was previously said, and so we can manage our time effectively. When we go over our agenda today, we'll cover which areas we may pause for questions. Lastly, for instructions for asking a question, you may utilize the raise hand icon located in the bottom toolbar. You'll see the raise hand icon above the participant chat window. You will be added to the raise hand queue. Also, when you're added and unmuted, you will be asked to provide your full name and affiliation or company name that you work for or represent so we can understand who you are. And also, if you have any questions, you also will be able to submit them to chat to all panelists. And those who are just dialed into the mobile device phone line, you'll use *3. But we also encourage you to provide your full name and affiliation before speaking. Today's our event producer is Ahmed. He'll be assisting us through the technical aspect, but if you have any questions, feel free to send them over to all panelists or myself. As a high-level overview of the policy initiative stakeholder process we have at the California ISO, we just show this to help outline what we are. Currently, we are in the working group phase within the pre-proposal development phase, and then we're kind of targeting our next steps within the phase 2 with the other 2 topics with the price formation enhancements. So our team will cover exactly which ones are going towards the STAR proposal, since we are having those other parallel discussions within the price formation enhancements. And at this time, I will invite Juan to go ahead and for this workshop goal. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. And good morning, Price Formation Enhancements community. Happy to be back. I'm going to cover a couple of quick goals for this workshop. Again, this is part of the Fast Start pricing track, and we've had a lot of discussions to date, very informative discussions. So the goal for today's session, we're going to have a presentation by James Friedrich on our high-level kind of key takeaways that we were able to glean from the MISO PJM, who were joined by their respective independent market monitors, their fast start pricing approaches. Through the lens of those conversations, we'd like to revisit CAISO's analysis, which you, the stakeholders, helped us scope in phase 1 of this working group, and relate that to the experiences for MISO and PJM. And then finally, we're also joined by Mike Collider, who has provided his comments on those MISO PJM discussions. The memo of his comments can be found on that stakeholder page. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So let's do a quick timeline on the working group discussions here, right? We started on November 14th, where we explored those initial design concepts. How do we define a fast start resource, and a review of the modified offer curve to amortize commitment costs into market prices. That conversation continued in December. How long to amortize costs and whether to apply fast start pricing in the day ahead market. Good conversation there. The next 2 sessions were, as mentioned, with MISO and their independent market monitoring, offering their perspectives, followed by PJM and their IMM and providing their perspectives. And that leads us to today, right? We've had a lot of kind of information, so I'm going to really strongly encourage the stakeholders on this call to react as James and Mike go through their presentations. We are presenting our key takeaways from the MISO and PJM presentations. If you have any questions on what is presented, let's say on James's slides, any kind of a clarifying question of what his takeaway is, raise your hand. But I would also strongly encourage you, if you had the same takeaway, or if perhaps you had a different takeaway you don't see represented on those slides, that is also the opportune time to raise your hand, share your key takeaways, and we'll allow James's presentation to kind of guide us through that conversation. But again, we are wanting this to be very interactive. All the information that we've gone over fast start pricing in the sessions that you see here, we want to hear from you what your key takeaways are as well. So if we could go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So just again, to kind of go through, reiterate the point I just made. Brenda, thanks for the welcome, logistics and introductions. We're going to kick it off with James Friedrich on his take of those key takeaways for MISO and PJM. Again, during that presentation, we want to hear what yours were. And then we'll turn it over to Mike Kavalader, who will be going over his comments on the presentations by MISO and PJM. Take a look at his memo posted on the initiative page. Brenda, perhaps we can put that in the chat just for quick access for our stakeholders. Again, that can be very interactive. And then we will, of course, leave some time at the end here just for any kind of open discussion or questions and answers from there. So looking forward to the good conversation here. At this time, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And I'd like to hand this off to Mr. James Friedrich. James, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me all right? All right, thank you, Juan. And thanks, Brenda, for the introduction, Juan for that too. And so for the first part of our session today, I'll be providing a relatively short presentation on from the ISO's perspective and the ISO's price formation enhancements team, what we think are the top high-level takeaways that the working group should take away from the discussions from the previous sessions, where we were lucky to have staff from MISO and PJM and their respective market monitors discuss their perspectives and experience with the implementation of fast start pricing in their market. So we hope today's discussion will be interactive. If you have any questions or feedback or comments on the material that I present today, please do raise your hand and we'll talk about it. So first we want to make sure, if it's not clear already, that fast start pricing is a complicated topic with trade-offs. It's not a simple plug-and-play mechanism. It's sophisticated, and it's designed to address specific pricing issues that we'll talk more about today. Both Mike and I will talk more about that. But also it can, in some cases, introduce some new complexity and potential unintended consequences, as we heard from both the experience of MISO, how their implementation of fast start pricing has been an iterative process since 2015, with which they've had several phases of improvements to their design. And then from the PJM experience, some potential unintended consequences as discussed by their market monitor. So we continue to believe that a key takeaway should be that fast start pricing designs need to account for each market's unique issues, resource characteristics, and design features. No fast start pricing design is exactly alike. And although the MISO and PJM markets have some similarities, there are also some differences both in their implementation and in their experience with fast start pricing. Next slide, please. So this set of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about revisit the core problem that fast start pricing addresses, which is non-convex costs. And that was something that was discussed both by the MISO market monitor and the PJM market monitor. So taking a step back, thinking about what's the difference between convex and non-convex and convex costs, and why markets with non-convex costs are harder to price. When we're thinking about convexity, a producer that has convex costs when its marginal cost, or the cost of producing one more unit, increases as output increases. And therefore, a market that has convex costs when all of its participating producers exhibit convex costs. So in markets with convex costs, there are clear and well-defined marginal costs at each level of production that, under perfect competition, ensures allocative efficiency, which is essentially a fancy way of saying that suppliers that are willing to sell at the market clearing price do so. All suppliers that are not willing to sell at the market clearing price do not. And similarly, all consumers that are willing to pay the market clearing price to consume the good do so, and all consumers that are not willing to pay the market clearing price do not. And moving into the next slide now, this is where the issue that fast start pricing is attempting to resolve, that electricity as a good unfortunately does not exhibit convexity in its costs. For example, electricity producers have startup and no load costs that are binary or commitment costs that incur anytime a unit moves from an offline to an online state. Electricity producers also have operational constraints like minimum output levels. That means that there's not always, for their entire operating range, going to be, a marginal cost of production at every point. And a combination of these characteristics, combined with some others, make the total cost function of electric producers non-convex, and therefore electricity markets exhibit non-convex costs. And this non-convex nature of electricity markets creates theoretical challenges in determining the quote-unquote right price. That is not so much a challenge with convex cost markets. For one, the aggregate market supply curve will not be smooth and continuously increasing with output. In other words, an increase in supply could lead to a decrease in marginal cost because you may be, for example, because of suppliers' minimum output levels, in order to turn on a certain unit with a minimum output level, you may have to turn on that unit at a certain fixed block, or have to back down another flexible unit in order to accommodate that unit startup. And we'll see a little bit in the examples that I provided in the next slides how that can be the case. Also, market prices may fail to recover the full cost of producers, which is why electricity markets often require additional mechanisms like uplift payments to make sure that producers can recover their full cost through the market. So moving into the next slide now, we'll provide some visual examples. So this, starting on the right-hand side, this simple example is basically showing a situation where we have two units that are needed to meet demand. Unit 1 is represented in blue, and it has a marginal cost, $25 per megawatt hour, and a 200 megawatt capacity. Unit 2 is represented in both green and orange. It has a $50 incremental cost and 100 megawatt capacity, but 75 megawatts of those are fixed, meaning that this unit 2 cannot produce at any level below 75 megawatts. And the level between 75 and 100 megawatts, which are represented by the orange box, is a flexible part of their dispatch range. So then moving over to the left-hand side, we have a sort of a two-axis chart here where we have different levels of demand moving from 0 to 300 as you move from left to right. On the left-hand side, we have the axis for representing the marginal price, which is the blue line here. And in the shaded regions represents the output level of the individual generators, unit 1 in blue and unit 2 in green and orange. And the takeaway here is that, you know, as we increase in demand, one of the breaking points happens here at 200 megawatts, where since unit 1 is the cheaper unit in this case, we want to use all of unit 1, unit 1's capacity to meet the demand up to 200 megawatts, at which point, after 200 megawatts, unit 1 is no longer individually sufficient to meet the demand. And so unit 2 is needed anytime the overall demand exceeds 200 megawatts. However, since unit 2 has a fixed block of 75 megawatts, when you are utilizing this resource, you cannot utilize it incrementally from 0 to 100. You must take all 75 megawatts at a time, and therefore it reduces at demands above 200 megawatts, reduces the amount of capacity that's needed from unit 1. And because in this case, unit 1 is the marginal unit that's responding to whose output is changing incrementally with demand at this point, the marginal price, even at demand between 200 and 275 megawatts, remains at $25, which is set by the cheaper unit 1. And that's despite the fact that unit 2 is online and producing and has an incremental cost of 50. So the unit 2 is not able to set the price at $50 until the demand level reaches 275 megawatts or higher, at which point unit 2 is now on its dispatchable range and can set the marginal price up to 50. So as you can see here, you know, this is a simple example trying to illustrate the core problem that fast start pricing is intended to address, which is that unit 2, which is a more expensive unit, is needed to meet demand at levels between 200 and 275 megawatts. But because its fixed block of its minimum output level, it's not capable of setting the marginal price at that level of demand. And so, you know, the marginal cost is being set by the lower cost unit 1. So we'll go to the next slide, and there will be a little bit of an extension of this example here, in which we present two different scenarios here. The upper scenario representing the traditional LMP price and outcome, and the bottom scenario representing the fast start pricing outcome. So in the top outcome, we're assuming that this red line is representative of the demand of 250 megawatts at this point. And so what's happening, if the demand is 250 megawatts, we know that we need the minimum block output from unit 2 in order to satisfy the demand of 250 megawatts, because unit 1 can only provide 200. So in the traditional LMP, as we showed on the previous slide, the price is going to turn out to be $25, which is set by the marginal or the incremental cost of unit 1. And that $25 price is below the cost of the unit 2 and its fixed output block. And therefore, that blue shaded region on the left represents the uplift payment that's needed to be paid to unit 2 in order to cover its costs in this scenario. Now, on the bottom slide, when we introduce fast start pricing and we allow the unit 2, the fast start unit, to set the marginal price in this case, the demand of 250 megawatts will have a associated price of $50 per megawatt hour, which is the incremental cost of unit 1. In this case, there is no uplift for unit 2, or there's at least no bid cost recovery for unit 2 in this case, because the $50 price is sufficient to cover its costs. Unit 1 earns some marginal profit represented in the green box. And then that remaining blue box represents the lost opportunity payment that may be needed to incentivize unit 1 to follow its market operator instructed dispatch, instead of recognizing that at a $50 marginal price, unit 1 would be best off by producing 200 megawatts for its full capacity, even though in this case the market operator is asking them not to produce their full amount. So we'll talk a lot more about this lost opportunity cost concept, both in mine and Mike's presentation moving forward. But hopefully for you visual learners, this is a helpful refresher and sort of what the key problem fast start pricing is intending to resolve. And I'll just reflect quickly that these are examples that are related to uplift payments that are necessary because of minimum output constraints. Neither of these units in these examples have commitment costs, which would potentially exacerbate the uplift issues. So hopefully that's a helpful refresher. Next slide, please. So to summarize the examples we just saw, when an inflexible high-cost unit is needed, as was the case in the previous example, but is not marginal because of their minimum output level, the LMPs don't reflect the full cost of serving load. And then the market operator makes out-of-market payments or uplift payments to cover the full cost of these units when this happens. So this is why some of ISOs and RTOs, including MISO and PGM, have implemented fast start pricing or similar mechanisms that allow certain qualifying fast start units and their costs to be reflected in prices, even when they're not technically marginal due to their operational constraints. And we also do want to emphasize on the slide before we move on that the reducing uplift is not the primary goal of fast start pricing, but is an auxiliary benefit of improved price signals. And so just to make it clear that when we talk about the market operator making uplift payments to cover the full cost of these units, the objective of fast start pricing is not to completely eliminate those uplift payments. In fact, because of the non-convex nature of costs of producing electricity, it's unlikely to produce a price formation mechanism that's going to completely eliminate uplift payments. But the point here is that the reduction in uplift is a side benefit to the actual goal of fast start pricing, which is to reflect a more accurate price signal of the incremental cost of serving load. So just want to make that clear as we move forward in the presentation. I'll turn it over to Juan to facilitate the raised hand. Yep.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, James. And Alva, we do see your hand. We'll go to you first, but thank you, James. I think this is a good layout of the ISO's key takeaway of what the core problem fast start pricing addresses. Alva, let's go to you. I'm not sure if this resonates with you or if you have a clarifying question, but to the rest of the community, I would also strongly encourage you, to give your perspective on let's call it that text in gray, right? And share your perspective on what you see the core problem fast start pricing addressing after the several sessions that we've had kind of in an informational mode leading up to today. So Alva, let's go ahead and unmute you and go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me? Great, thank you. This is Alva Svoboda. Yep. I appreciated your presentation here, James, of the sort of the fundamental construct. And I just wanted to raise something for consideration as we go through, which is one of the problems that I have with this is it seems to lead to inconsistencies when there is responsive demand, either in the sense of demand response or in the sense of battery charging load, which figures into the optimization and then may see prices that are inconsistent with what was assumed in the optimization. So I think that I'd really like that's an issue that hasn't, I haven't listened to all of these calls, so it may have been foregrounded at some point, but I think it's an important point in the California context to consider that there's a potential for this approach is really based on inflexible demand essentially, and optimizing around inflexible demand and then compensating resources in a fairer way or a more transparent way for the cost of supply. But I think it leads to inherent inconsistencies when you have price responsive demand or battery charging. Thanks.
Thanks, Alba, for your feedback.
Let's give it a moment and see if anybody else has any thoughts on what their takeaways were on what is the core problem fast start pricing is trying to address. James, I'm not seeing any hands or anything in the chat. You know, as this is some complex material. So again, we do have the Q&A at the end of the session. So if you're mulling it over, feel free to shoot it in the chat, or we can come back to it at the end after both James and Mike's presentations. But James, go ahead. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide.
All right, great. Let's go to, slide 15 here. So transitioning away from the core problem that fast start pricing is intending to resolve, now more into the mechanics of how fast start pricing works. We've learned over the series of these working group discussions that there's really two main ways of implementing fast start pricing today. The first is through what we call modified offer curves. This is the way that New York ISO, ISO New England, and Southwest Power Pool have implemented fast start pricing, which is essentially that they develop a methodology to amortize or spread the commitment costs, being startup and no load costs, across time and across the unit's output to create dollar per megawatt hour adders that are added to the incremental offer of the unit and incorporated into the price calculation. I should also mention that the modified offer curve approach also assumes that the minimum output constraint of fast start units is also relaxed in the pricing run to enable these units to set the marginal price on any point of their capacity range. The other way of implementing fast start pricing that MISO and PJM both implemented is this concept called integer relaxation, where in typical unit commitment procedures, the unit commitment variable, which determines whether the unit is online or offline, is a 0 or 1 value, a binary value. But in the integer relaxation approach, they instead treat that commitment variable as a fractional commitment or a continuous number between 0 and 1. The consequence of that would be that a unit might be 0.5 committed, meaning half of its output is needed. And because the commitment variables relate to both the minimum and maximum operating range of the unit, the minimum output relaxation is not necessary for this approach. And because the commitment costs, which are related specifically to the unit commitment decision, can be automatically incorporated into the price calculation because the unit commitment variable itself is a continuous or can make those costs appear to the market optimization as marginal. So two different ways of coming up with fast start pricing. Mike will talk a little bit more in his presentation that it's his perspective and one that I share that it doesn't seem to us obvious that if integer relaxation and modified offer curves would produce different results if they were set up in similar ways. It's just different sort of paths of potentially getting to the same outcome. We also want to remind folks and reiterate that fast start pricing requires 2 market runs. In the dispatch run is where the actual physical unit commitment and physical dispatch of units is produced. And then all of the assumptions related to fast start pricing are incorporated into the pricing run, which determines the binding market clearing prices used for settlement. And those market clearing prices are using either the integer relaxation method as described above, or through modified offer curves with the minimum output relaxation. to incorporate the fast start price. So again, the fast start pricing is a feature only in the pricing run of the market. It does not affect the, at least in a static sense, the unit commitment or dispatch of units in the dispatch run. Next slide, please. So this slide represents a couple of different categories of some key design choices and challenges that were brought up by either MISO or PJM or their market monitors, and things that we wanted to highlight for the working group to take away. First, as it relates to eligibility and which units qualify as fast start, which is something we've had a number of our own discussions on in the working group. MISO, their experience was that they initially, when they first implemented fast start pricing, used a more restrictive definition of 10-minute startup and a 1-hour minimum run, and then expanded it in its phase 2 a few years later. And MISO has also expanded the eligibility of applying fast start pricing in emergency conditions to include resources with up to a 4-hour start time. And so they refer to this sort of as emergency pricing, but it's interesting to see the differences of MISO in terms of how they're qualifying a fast start unit. PJM, on the other hand, they also use a 1-hour startup and minimum runtime definition, and that's stayed the same since they've implemented it. And just to reiterate that, both the experience of both MISO and PJM found that the broader the definition, of course, the more units that can set the price and are eligible to set fast start pricing prices in the market. But the broader the definition, also the less quote unquote fast they are. And that's something that the PJM market monitor lamented, that they don't, in their view, don't feel like 1-hour startup is a good definition for what a fast start unit should be. In terms of cost amortization, again, both MISO and PJM used the integer relaxation approach, and they're amortizing the startup costs over the minimum runtime of the resource and the no load costs for the duration the unit is online and running. So that's another topic that we talked about in one of our earlier phase 2 sessions about how long should these commitment costs be included within the market price through fast start pricing, and this is the experience of MISO and PJM. MISO had quite a bit to say about offline fast start resources, and MISO in the past allows offline fast start resources to set price specifically to avoid energy or reserve deficits or transmission constraint violations. But that offline participation has been more and more restrictive over time. And PJM does not and had never allowed offline fast start resources to set prices in their market. So another interesting difference there. In terms of ramp constraints, MISO had talked in their phase 3 of their fast start pricing implementation that they initially had rules that prevented units from setting prices if they were constrained by their ramp down limit, which significantly reduced the number of units eligible to set fast start prices. So they later relaxed the ramp down limits in the ranges below the PMIN to make sure that the ramp down limit is not constraining the amount of supply that can set the marginal price. And finally, there was some discussion with PJM staff about their offer verification process for fast start units with composite offers above $1,000 per megawatt hour in compliance with FERC Order 831 and the conditions with which FERC requires cost verification for bids from suppliers submitted over $1,000. So we talked quite a bit with PJM about how they do that. So I'll pause there and turn it over to Juan to facilitate some questions here.
No, I appreciate that, James. There's a lot of good job synthesizing, a lot of discussion into a single slide. Would be very curious to hear from the stakeholder community if over the course of those conversations you had similar takeaways on some of these design choices and challenges. I know, for example, the definition, right, eligibility has been a topic of heavy discussion. So let's give it a moment here to see if we have any any hands, but do please share your thoughts if it resonated in the same way, and from your perspective, you kind of identified similar design choices and challenges. I think we do have something on in chat here, James. Could you please remind if fast start pricing, meaning modified offer curves or integer relaxation, is applied in only the price run or in both runs?
Yeah, the fast start pricing mechanism is applied only in the pricing run of the market. And so the unit commitment and dispatch decisions are made using the actual operating characteristics of the units, and the relaxation of those parameters are just applied in the pricing run in order to enable those prices to, or those units to set the marginal price.
Thank you, James. Alva, thank you for your engagement here. I see your hand up. Let's go ahead and unmute him.
Hi, James. I just wanted a reminder. There's and I think it's pretty much just the concept of fast start pricing is. Am I correct in thinking of it as an adder? I'm thinking about the whole question of the hangover aspect of the fast start price. So essentially, when it's amortized, it's amortized in the sense that there's something that's being allocated to future intervals, but it's still not necessarily the only input to setting prices in future intervals. Could you describe a little bit what your understanding is of how this is done in MISO or PJM, or how you're thinking about the component of pricing that has to do with fast start versus the other components that come up when you're doing real-time dispatch, for example?
I think it's easier to, let's first start with the modified offer curve approach, because I think it's easier to conceptualize that approach than the integer relaxation first. So in the modified offer curve approach, I would describe it as an adder, in which for fast start units, whatever we define that to be, we would have some sort of method of amortizing commitment costs, being startup costs and no-load costs, and potentially for MSGs, that would include transition costs as well, over time and space, essentially, in order to create a $1 per megawatt hour adder that is incremented on top of the unit's submitted incremental offer curve. And that a picture would help here, but I can recall some pictures from previous working group discussions where it's more obvious how to show how first, how the amortization process leads to an actual adder, and that adder may be different quantities at different bid segments, but essentially you can see comparisons of the submitted incremental offer curve versus the effective fast start pricing offer curve, and how it's different. For the integer relaxation, that same sort of process is happening, but the increments to cost of those commitment costs into the price are happening automatically through the marginal cost calculation, and the market operator is not constructing, doing an amortization process and constructing modified offer curves sort of on the side as an input into the market. So I think Mike's come on camera, so Mike may want to elaborate on this question a little more.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I try not to use the term adder when I'm talking about the modified offer curve approach. I mean, two of the approaches do use an adder. Essentially, they calculate an amount, $1 per megawatt hour amount that is then added to the incremental output curve to come up with a modified offer curve. The minimum average cost approach, which we'll go into some in my presentation, it doesn't come up with a constant adder that is added to the incremental output curve incremental offer curve for all quantities. It operates a little bit differently. So it comes up with a modified offer, but the difference between the modified offer and the original offer that was submitted is not going to be at constant level. So it's so I believe what James was saying was I think it was correct, but I just wanted to emphasize that adder kind of gives you the idea that you're just taking a certain, $10 or $20, whatever it is per megawatt hour, and adding it to all the bids, and that's not how it works for the minimum average cost approach.
But in terms of I mean, is it you're sort of saying it's like a price modification rule that becomes effective for some period, and I mean, then it's used along with what happens dynamically in the real-time dispatch after that point, right? So there's something that's getting set in place. As I think the adder concept makes sense to me, just as it's something that's set in place and then is there for a certain period. Essentially, is that still right? Even with the with your the alternative you're talking about.
Well, I think I would say that for whether it's an adder-based approach or the minimum average cost-based approach to coming up with the modified offer curve, there is a certain cost that needs to be allocated. And so the adder-based approach is essentially come up with a certain additional amount of cost. Exactly what that is, I'd rather not get too deep into the weeds on it, but they allocate that equally over all the megawatts. Whereas the minimum average cost approach doesn't do that. Now, what is that additional cost that's being allocated under either approach? It's going to have a couple of different components. It's going to have the minimum load cost, needs to be allocated out in some way. And this gets into differences between the two different adder-based approaches. But to the extent that minimum load cost exceeds the incremental cost of increasing your output above the PMIN, that's something that needs to be allocated in some way. The other part is startup cost, and that how you allocate startup cost may depend upon exactly at what point in time we are. For example, if you allocate cost over, let's just say, the first half hour of unit's operation, then you're going to get a different modified offer curve for the first half hour than you are going to be for the time following the first half hour where you're no longer allocating the startup cost. So there's a so the total amount that is being allocated is going to reflect both minimum load cost and the portion of startup cost that is allocated to that point in time, which could be none or it could be some, depending on exactly what the rules are in place for allocating startup costs.
Okay, so there's a dynamic allocation of these costs, and then if things happen in the RTD that take prices higher or lower, the allocation is done relative to those prices that will manifest as you go through time.
Well, the modification, I mean, we're going to be modifying the offer curves, and that's going to go into the pricing pass, which is going to determine the price. So it's not going to be responding to the price. It's going to be an input that is used to determine the pricing pass.
But as you go into future intervals, as things change,
Mm-hmm.
what happens then? If a resource stops, if a resource is if other resources become marginal or load decreases, et cetera, how are you seeing the kind of the response of this approach to things changing as you move through time? And you got it wrong, let's just say, and or not necessarily got it wrong, but the change in price is such that, for example, that the prices go down in any case, and you've got the adder, but it's on top of something which is much lower. Is that a correct way to think about this?
I would say it's the offer curves are used the same way you'd use offer curves in any dispatch. So if there's a decrease in load and the unit is no longer dispatched in the pricing pass, it doesn't set the price. If there's an increase in load and the unit is inframarginal in the pricing pass, some other unit that's more expensive sets the price.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Alva. We did also get a question in the chat regarding if we have any analysis on the existing fleet and past market bids to get a sense of how many units might qualify. We do have some slides a little bit later that will cover that. So appreciate that, and we will have again part of the presentation kind of addressing that. But if you wanted to jump on audio here, and if there were any thoughts you had as far as that eligibility itself, please do so. Bonnie, I see your hand. Good to hear from you. Let's go ahead and unmute Bonnie, please. All right, event producer, if we could please unmute Bonnie Blair.
Hi, Juan. Thanks. This is Bonnie Blair. I work with the Six Cities group. If the price modification is only applied in the pricing run and not in the dispatch run, wouldn't it be possible or even likely that the dispatch optimization would turn out to be suboptimal? In other words, you no longer have the dispatch optimization, meeting the objective of supplying the next megawatt with the least costly resource?
I wouldn't say that necessarily, because remember because the fast start pricing components are only present in the pricing run, the dispatch run, which is calculating the optimal unit commitment and dispatch of resources, is not has no concept of the outcomes of the pricing pass. And so it's using the as bid offers, the commitment costs of these units, and the full operating constraints of these units to come up with a solution. And the modifications made to pricing from fast start pricing are just relevant to the prices that are associated with some level of dispatch, or you could think of them as changing the way those units are settled for a given dispatch or commitment. But on a static basis, they don't impact the dispatch or commitment. Now, there is an argument potentially that on a dynamic basis, that the price signal may encourage or elicit different behavior or offers from price responsive market participants who are looking at a different who are behaving differently based on a prevailing price that incorporates fast start pricing, and thus what's actually offered to the market may in a dynamic sense change, but in a static sense there is no impact to the dispatch.
Well, but I guess that's my concern. In other words, if there's this disconnect between the cost elements that are considered in the dispatch and that drive the dispatch, and then the settlement, it seems like there's a potential distortion of the dispatch, or I'm not sure what the right term is, but that the dispatch becomes suboptimal. And maybe, and I think this is similar to what Alva was getting at also, if I can borrow from his concepts. And why wouldn't it make sense to let, if you're going to do this fast start pricing stuff, which I'm not saying you should do, if you're going to do it, why not reflect it in dispatch as well as in the pricing run? I'm just troubled by this disconnect between what you think you're optimizing and then how the prices turn out to be.
Yeah, so I'll respond to sort of two different questions I heard there. First is, you may be looking for the term, or for the phrase that the prices, and there are inconsistencies between the prices and the schedules. I wouldn't use the phrase suboptimal dispatch, but I would use that it creates the potential for inconsistencies between schedules and prices in this, and we'll talk a little bit about you know, how PJM specifically went about resolving that problem. And then the second part of the question was about, well, if fast start pricing is such a good thing, why doesn't it apply? Why not apply it in the dispatch run? And I guess the basic idea being that in, you know, fast start pricing, you know, modifies the physical parameters of the units in order to create a different pricing outcome, but recognizing that the relaxation of those operating constraints are just for pricing purposes. But if you were to actually use those in your dispatch run, you could be sending dispatch instructions to resources that are physically infeasible. You know, for example, and this will make more sense in maybe going through some of Mike's examples, but there, you know, oftentimes when a fast start unit is setting the price, in the pricing run, they're you know, calculated as if they can, you know, be dispatched at any price. But in the dispatch run, you don't want to actually send them dispatch instructions that are in, you know, a part of their operating range that they can't operate in. And so that's sort of why there's this change that's applied only in the pricing run and not in the dispatch run.
Okay, thanks. I'll ponder that.
Yeah, good questions.
Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, let's give it a moment to see if Alva or Bonnie's questions and that discussion kind of resonated with anyone else. Again, quite a bit here distilled on this slide. So let's just give it a moment, and again, we're here to hear from you. We want to understand what your key takeaways were from the last several fast start pricing sessions.
Juan, if I could add one comment to
Please,
an earlier question.
Yeah.
There was an earlier question about the existing fleet and getting a sense for how many units might qualify for fast start. I do have some numbers in some upcoming slides, particularly for gas, but the CAISO's analysis back in April 2024 has much more information than I'm going to present on that question. So I would encourage that commenter or anyone interested in that question to open back up the April 2024 analysis and check out some of the information in there.
Good call out. And we had a thank you response in the chat there. James, I'm not seeing any other additional hands or comments here on these key design choices and challenges, and we appreciate you presenting the ISO's perspective on the takeaways from the conversation. Let's go ahead and keep moving forward.
Okay, so just a time check. I'd like to finish my slides by 10:30 Pacific time, so I think I'm on pace to do that, but keep me in line here, Juan. All right, let's go to slide 17. So this slide and the next slide are going to discuss the difference in perspectives between the MISO Independent Market Monitor and the PJM Independent Market Monitor. So in MISO, Potomac Economics, you know, they fundamentally support fast start pricing, and their argument is, as we've discussed in sort of the core principle or problem statements, that when inflexible high-cost resources like fast start units are needed but not able to set prices, it can create several market inefficiencies, including the need for uplift payments to cover those units' costs, understated real-time prices that provide inefficient incentives for day-ahead scheduling, and poor incentives for imports and exports that could help displace the higher cost peaking resources. And this is getting a little bit at the dynamic effect that we touched on when Bonnie's question, that, you know, from the MISO's market monitor's point of view, there's a dynamic response here that there are sort of upstream actions that are not happening the way they should because the price signal is not, you know, accurate in the sense. And the MISO market monitor's presentation demonstrated the effectiveness of fast start pricing in the MISO in addressing these inefficiencies by showing that there were increased LMPs when fast start resources are economic, reduced uplift overall, improved day ahead and real-time price convergence, and preserved emergency price signals for the emergency portion of this of the fast start pricing implementation for the MISO. Next slide, please. The PJM market monitor had a different perspective. They're fundamentally opposed to fast start pricing. Their argument was that fast start pricing removes efficient market outcomes by changing prices from the efficient levels where the price deviates from the short run marginal cost in the market, which can create incentives for market participants to deviate from the efficient behavior and thus require additional uplift payments to correct these incentive distortions. So, you know, tying back to Bonnie's question, another way of putting this is that from the PJM market monitor's point of view, fast start pricing creates inconsistencies between schedules and prices that cause behavior to deviate from the efficient level rather than the MISO's market monitor that it improves the behavior of market participants. And from their point of view, they highlighted several issues that they're observing with fast start pricing in the PJM market. One, in creating artificial reserve, from their point of view, artificial reserve shortages by removing reserves from the pricing round that actually exist in the dispatch. They know it has not achieved, it has not helped incentivize more fast start units into the market. In fact, the number of CTs or combustion turbines and diesels has actually decreased in the PJM footprint. And it creates pricing inconsistencies for virtual traders and FTR, or in CAISO's language, CRR holders. So interesting juxtaposition there of the different perspectives, which was another reason why we felt it was valuable to bring the market monitor, both market monitors' perspectives along, so folks can get a full sense of what the debate looks like from those parties. Next slide, please. So in the next 4 or 5 slides, I'll talk a little bit about the impact that MISO and PJM experience as it relates to prices and uplift in their markets. So first, starting with MISO, we'll just first note here for a reminder that MISO has implemented fast start pricing in 3 different phases, and the impact of prices has changed depending on the phase. In phase 1, the short of it is that MISO had only allowed resources with 10-minute startup and 1-hour minimum runtime to be eligible for fast start pricing. And in phase 2, expanded that definition to include units with a 60-minute startup time. And then phase 3 is where they got rid of the relaxation of the ramp down limits and also included day ahead committed fast start resources in the real-time pricing to sort of further expand the eligibility of fast start resources in setting these prices. So then in the table below, I've distinguished here between online and offline fast start pricing and also day ahead and real-time market impacts. And one of the things to keep in mind from the MISO presentation is that the implementation of fast start pricing includes what's called this offline fast start pricing, which enables offline fast start resources to set the price in the market in order to avoid prices being set at a transmission constraint penalty price or a energy reserve shortage price, which actually puts downward pressure on those prices, on the real-time prices, because you're avoiding prices being set at the penalty price. So when you're looking back through the MISO material, keep in mind that, for the aggregate impact of their implementation includes this concept, which sort of in a way sort of fuzzies the picture about what the fast start pricing impacts that we're all used to thinking about are. So that's why I distinguish here between online and offline pricing. So for the online pricing only, which is just the fast start pricing that we're talking about here, they've seen increases in LMP during the ramping periods and peak periods of the day, and generally higher price effects during the higher load seasons of the year. In phase one, they're seeing about $1 per megawatt hour average increase. And in phase two, when they expand the eligibility to 60 minutes, moving that to $3 of an average increase. And then phase three, further price increases because you've included the day ahead, you've expanded the eligibility even further. They note a very minimal impact in the day ahead market, which seems to be pretty consistent across any market I've looked at, of only about 2 cents. But they do note that in the phase three, they did have improved day ahead and real-time convergence because they were enabling real-time prices to be set even by fast start resources that were committed in the day ahead market. For the offline pricing, this is just for the offline fast start resources. They see generally decreased prices during scarcity and constraint situations by mitigating those price spikes. And I think something like $20 on average lower price for during these events in phase one, and something like $60 lower during phase two. So again, that has puts some downward pull on the overall impact of this implementation on their overall market pricing. And then for the offline units, there's really not much direct impact in the day ahead market. The market monitor does note a potential for some slight indirect improvement in day ahead scheduling because of the which contributes to the better price convergence. Next slide, please. So in PJM,
real quick,
yeah.
Sorry about that. We do have Alva's hand up. If we could go back a slide and unmute Alva here.
Hi, James, just a couple of thoughts on this, on the MISO takeaways. One question, and I don't know the answer, is whether they generally don't like the use of virtual bids to bring about convergence between day ahead and real time, because I think both from my perspective and the way the PJM monitor presented things, it would seem that virtual bids should address some of the non-convergence between prices that they were discussing. The other point, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting my second point, but oh yes, it's. I just wanted to sort of connect this to our own our own scarcity pricing initiative, and say that in some sense this effect that they're talking about of decreased prices during scarce periods, if it's not the result of increased participation by resources that would, it's sort of like you have two choices. You can bring more resources in, and this may have the effect of bringing more resources in, or you need higher prices during scarcity events. And the fact that they're saying that prices are coming down during scarcity events is not actually a positive from the perspective that has been raised in the scarcity pricing initiative of wanting higher price signals to incent resources that are not in the market essentially to come into the market. So I think it's a two-edged sword, the way they're describing the effects, so supposedly positive effects of fast start pricing in their market.
Yeah, so on the first point on convergence, sorry, Juan. Yeah.
No, quite all right, James, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure either what the market monitor's perspective on. I would imagine that they probably do see a role of virtual traders in producing convergence, but they did note that at least in the phase three, that some of the convergence was I think their evidence is showing that some of their convergence is impacted by improved day-ahead scheduling and sort of resources responding, scheduling themselves better in the day-ahead market, responding to and positioning themselves for prices in the real-time market, contributing to that. And then on the offline pricing, so I might rely on Mike or maybe even on Michaela. I see her hand up, and I know she knows quite a bit about the MISO market, but I can't off the top of my head describe to you perfectly why the concept of offline pricing and why it exists. And essentially, your comment that, well, they're trying to, it seems counter to what we're doing in scarcity pricing, where they're looking at these mechanisms actually to reduce the price during scarce conditions. And I think what the difference is, there's a couple of differences. First, that in the MISO market, they have different lower levels of transmission constraint violation penalty prices that are sort of more in the economic range, where they will, in the CAISO market, we don't really have, we have transmission constraint penalty prices, but there's not this sort of transmission constraint violation demand curve, so you will, where there's actually transmission constraint violation prices that get into sort of the price range that during the normal market clearing process. And so what they're essentially saying is that in cases where there otherwise would be a fast start unit that could resolve the constraint, but is not committed or dispatched by the market for whatever reason, it would be better to use the cost of that offline resource as a better proxy for the value of pricing that constraint rather than the administrative price. And so that's a fuzzy answer. Maybe Mike or Michaela knows a little bit more about. And I actually will say Mike has a good part of his memo and presentation on the offline pricing part of it. Maybe Mike wants to expand on that a little bit.
So Mike, why don't we go to you, and then Michaela, your hand did go up in the middle of Alvin's comment. So if that was something that resonated with you, let's like Mike go, and Michaela would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. So just on the first part, the virtual bidding, I mean, I feel pretty confident that the Midwest, that the IMM and MISO is in favor of that. I guess I don't know what specifically, but I feel pretty confident about that prediction. But virtual bidding is going to make, I certainly agree that it's going to tend to make day ahead and real time prices converge. But I would say more specifically that it's going to make day ahead prices converge, move towards real time prices. So the question we have here is, what should the real time price be? Should the real time price, what mechanism should be used to set that? Whichever that is, I believe day ahead price, virtual bidding will make the day ahead price approach that real time price, but I don't think the existence of that necessarily addresses the question of what should the real time price to begin with. It just has to do with the fact that the day ahead price will tend in that direction, given the use of virtual bidding. Then the other question was how to do the offline pricing. I think, James, that at least with my respect, with respect to New York ISO's use of offline fast start units are eligible to set price in New York. And my experience there is that it was, I think, as you described for MISO, that was a pretty good description of what went on in New York too. Essentially, they had, there were mechanisms in the dispatch software which ensured that the software would solve, but you could get extremely high prices when you might have a transmission violation. So I think the maximum shadow price they were using was something along the lines of $4,000 per megawatt hour. So making offline units eligible for pricing really played the role of essentially limiting that. And to the extent that they were able to develop transmission demand curves that gave a better correspondence that essentially gave more reasonable results for relatively small violations of transmission facilities so that the price just didn't shoot off to the moon. That helped to eliminate a lot of the, rationale for why they have offline units involved in the pricing. And so now their plan is to get rid of it. They have higher priorities, but that's the only reason why they haven't gotten rid of it is it's on their menu of things to do. It's just that there are more important things to do first. So that's why it's still in place.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Alva, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you stay off of mute, but let's unmute Michaela. Again, I really do want to encourage, stakeholder conversation. Michaela, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Michaela Fogg, CES. I guess to speak a little bit to like MISO's thoughts on their offline pricing. I wasn't there at the implementation of their offline pricing construct, but I was there through a lot of the discussions on whether or not it should continue and the benefits that it was serving. As you heard at the meeting prior, Potomac Economics, the market monitor, is very critical of offline pricing. So there's still considerable current discussions at MISO on its impact and intent. From the scarcity pricing point of view, part of the issue is that there were transient scarcity events where they were actually mostly just ramp. MISO was short on ramp, and so we'd hit the scarcity pricing demand curve for just an interval or two, just while those slower units caught up. And so MISO recognized that with the implementation of their flexible ramping product, that those instances were decreasing, but they still didn't feel like it was appropriate for instances that were kind of causing scarcity in times where we weren't really scarce. We were just scarce ramp. That setting price at the ORDC wasn't appropriate in those cases. But again, there are multiple ways of solving that, right? I'm not sure that it's so much an issue in CAISO, with the robust flexible reserve product. And so I think studying and better understanding the actual problem is important.
It's a great point, Michaela. Does that lead you to think that the MISO approach may not really apply in CAISO?
I really don't know. I know MISO looked at their scarcity pricing events and just saw that so many of them were just transient in nature.
Due to this transmission.
And it was decreasing with the flexible ramping product.
Thank you.
But yeah, so it's hard to say here.
Nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Alva. Appreciate that. All right, James, no further hands. Let's, I'm doing my best to keep my charge of 10:30. Let's keep you moving. But again, don't hesitate to raise that hand. Good conversation. Go ahead, James.
Okay, thanks everyone. So let's go to the next slide, slide 20. So in the PJM experience, their monthly load weighted average real-time prices, that's a lot of adjectives, at major hubs were on average 8% higher with fast start pricing, which comes out to about $2.58 per megawatt hour, which is around the average of MISO. If you think about MISO during phase 3, moving towards 60-minute eligible startup time, and that's what PJM implemented. So their average LMP impact is pretty similar with that respect. With peak ramping hours closer to the $4 to $6 megawatt hour range. So of course, being an average over the day, $2.58 is going to look a lot closer to zero during the non-ramping hours and going to look closer to $4 to $6 during the peak and ramping hours. PJM also experienced very little impact to day-ahead market prices, with somewhere in the range of MISO, but of the months that they studied, the highest I saw ranges anywhere from 0 impact to 0.5%. So not very large. Next slide, please. Slide 21. Okay. So now on uplift, during phase one, MISO and their market monitor report modest decreases in uplift. In their term for their equivalent of bid cost recovery would be RSG, or revenue sufficiency guarantee. Costs dropped about 1% during the expected period, meaning that the periods with which you would expect fast start pricing to apply. And then once they expanded the eligibility of the units in phase two, that moved the decrease in uplift cost to closer to 9%. Next slide, please. So then on PJM, the concept is a little more complicated because PJM actually implemented a new form of uplift and a settlement called dispatch differential lost opportunity cost, which I'll abbreviate to DDLOC, or I might just call lost opportunity cost, which represents the difference between what the resource would have earned if operating at the pricing runs megawatt level and what it actually earned following the dispatch runs instructions. And so this was implemented in 2021, and the overall impact of this new uplift category has been relatively small, ranging anywhere between $0.1 and $3.6 million per year. And the market monitor says that the net change in uplift is an open empirical question, but they believe that it has not led to an overall decrease. And it's an open empirical question because, you know, you have to study. You can't just look at changes in uplift from year to year and bid cost recovery equivalent costs year to year and say, you know, that's all due to fast start pricing. You have to sort of tease out things that are related to, you know, changes in gas costs and stuff like that. And where MISO may have been more comfortable providing the, you know, the impact specific to fast start pricing implementation, the PJM did not have that information.
Thanks, James. And
again,
real quick, I know we're trying to move quickly here, but I do want to take a moment and pause here and ask the stakeholder community to kind of reflect on that information that you just provided. We had some good conversation around, you know, the impact of pricing, but in essence, we had a kind of fundamentally different perspectives from each respective IMM on fast start pricing. And, you know, we alluded to a couple times the impact of pricing and then a play on that definition criteria for fast start pricing. So just wanted to see if that resonated at all with any of the stakeholders here on the call, and if anybody would like to share some thoughts. If not, I know we have the CAISO analysis, and let's get through that section and then we can take some questions. But just wanted to give a moment to see if anybody had any reactions they'd like to share. All right, James, I'm not seeing anything. Let's go ahead and go through the rest of your presentation. We'll take comments at the end on your kind of retrospective on our analysis. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do here is just to revisit some of the high-level takeaways of the CAISO's analysis it did in April 2024. In light of the discussions with MISO and PJM, and you know, maybe some of these findings feel and look a little differently now, understanding the experiences of the MISO and PJM. So just as a reminder, the CAISO's analysis was the preliminary assessment of the potential impact of fast start pricing on the WEIM market, and was not a policy proposal, but just an exploration of various design choices and their likely effects. Next slide, please. So in this analysis, the ISO explored things like eligibility, focusing on startup times of thresholds between 30 and 60 minutes in particular. There were 3 different amortization methods that were used, all using the modified offer curve methodology, but again, as we'll discuss, as Mike will discuss a little bit more, there may not be much difference in the outcome of the energy relaxation approach and the minimum average cost approach. the analysis amortized costs over the minimum uptime, which is consistent with the way that it's done in MISO and PJM. And also because the market simulation was not able to include, local transmission constraints, there were two different bookends that were explored. One is a BA level with which you assume essentially no EIM transfers and that only internal resources can set the prices within the WIM area. And then a system level bookend where you have essentially unlimited transfer capability where any resource in the WIM can set the marginal price across the entire market, as a way to saying that the impact is likely, factoring in local transmission constraints, is likely to be in between those two bookends. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of two other elements, that only economic commitments count towards pricing, so that, and that's the case in any market. So that excludes things like self-scheduled, if the FastStart resource is self-scheduled or is committed due to something called a minimum online constraint, which is sort of a local reliability requirement, but also excludes base scheduling as well, which is a feature unique to the WEIM that's not part of the MISO or PJM market. And that CAISO's analysis excluded offline units, so there's no offline pricing included here, and also includes multi-stage generator transitions, which is not a functionality in the MISO PJM market. Next slide, please. So again, from the key findings from the analysis is that the overall impact of FastStart pricing on the WIM prices are projected to be generally moderate, is the way the analysis describes it, with system monthly average price increases ranging for anywhere from 0.2 to $2 per megawatt hour, depending on the scenario, and ranging from $0 to $8.70, depending on the region. So there are, obviously the different scenarios will result in different ways that costs are amortized and spread, and so will impact LMPs differently. And then, of course, you have regional characteristics depending on your concentration of FastStart resources in those areas, especially FastStart gas units. The 60-minute startup time and minimum uptime definition qualifies about 19% of total WIM gas capacity, and that's exactly the same for 30 minutes. So the 30-minute, moving to a 30-minute definition does exclude a small portion of some non-gas FastStart resources, but if natural gas is the field type of the resource, there isn't any registered in the WEIM that qualifies for 60 and doesn't qualify for 30. But then moving down to 10-minute startup would include about 13% of the WEIM gas capacity. Similar to the experiences of MISO and PJM, the LMP increases or the price increases are higher during the summer months, during peak demand, the ISO systems and the WEIM's peak demand, and are concentrated in the morning and evening peak hours when units are starting up and transitioning. And that sort of same pattern is reflected in the price curves from both MISO and PJM.
Hey, James, popping back on video here. We have Alva's hand up, and just to the community, we do have that 30 minutes at the end of the session. And I don't say that to hold your questions for now, but to say that we have a little buffer so we can eat into that 30 minutes. I think this is a good conversation. Let's go ahead and unmute Alva, please.
Yes, this is great, James, to step us through this in this way. One thing I was wondering about, and again, I'm sort of like still trying to get the concept, my head around the concept is, so clearly there may be more of a reason for fast start pricing or other BAAs that are participating in the WIM and potentially in the EDAM. And so there's partly, I'm assuming this is part of the motivation for the amount of time we've spent on this. How much or how does fast start pricing in another BAA affect pricing in CAISO? I mean, is this a component of price that is extended across the entire footprint automatically, or how does I'm just not quite clear as to how this, or is it just simply restricted to the LMP? I don't really understand how it propagates essentially in a multi-BAA setting.
So the best way to think about this answer, in my opinion, is to think about two separate bookends that the analysis did. And first is to think about what would happen if there's no transfers in the WAM, so no imports and exports in WAM, which essentially means that only resources within the EIM BAA itself can set the prices in its own local area. So of course, that would mean that there is no permeation of prices across the market because they're being, CAISO prices would be set by CAISO resources and et cetera for all the BAs. Now, the other bookend is the other extreme is to think about, well, what if there's unlimited transfer capability in the WAM, with which, since the WAM is a single market optimization, would essentially mean that a fast start resource anywhere could set the marginal price for every BAA, because in that case, there are no transfer constraints between the EIM areas, and therefore, the marginal unit in any BAA is going to set the price for the entire market. So in that case, yes, the fast start price, regardless of where that unit is, can spread across the entire market. And then in reality, when you're somewhere in between, it can get complicated by things like, both local transmission constraints, which may isolate the impact of how far a fast start price spreads, but also transfer constraints, which might isolate, to which BAAs it spreads, for example. So I hope that's a good way of thinking about your question.
Yeah. Does that mean that so is it a simple matter to say how this works in the pricing run based on the constraints, the transfer? Let's just say you've got a scheduling run solution. Can you essentially look at the solution and say if there are transfers between two BAAs, then there will be some propagation of the fast start pricing from over those BAAs that are transferring to one another. And if they're not, or if there's a constraint, then they would not be. Is that essentially kind of the way that you would describe the expected effects?
And is this in context of implementation of fast start pricing or analysis of the expected impact you're getting at here?
Probably both.
I guess, yeah.
I'm also
thinking
the idea of whether things change over time as well. From over the hour, if there are transfers in one period and not in another, is kind of I'll give you the hard case to try to see how you see it as sort of falling out, whether it's automatically easy, hard, or are you going to be doing all kinds of rule-based stuff to determine whether the fast start price in one area is affecting the price in another area.
Right. So as it relates to the analysis, that was not a simple thing to incorporate the effect of transfers or those types of constraints in the actual analysis. And I'd rely on Guillermo to provide a better explanation, since he worked on the nuts and bolts of that model, why that was true. But I'll just let you know that it was something that we had considered and tried to do, and ultimately found it was just not feasible to do that estimate. Now, in terms of the implementation, of course, it's not as tricky, because this is something that's going to be implemented within the actual market software, and presumably when you're doing, if fast start pricing were to be implemented, just as with any other market design feature, by having the actual code in there and doing some analysis and market simulation and parallel operations, you're able to get a much better sense about the estimated impact, a truer sense of the estimated impact once you actually have the code in there. But one thing I want to point out before I conclude is that in in the MISO simulations of their phase 2, I think this was in the MISO presentation, they simulated the implementation of their phase 2 and estimated the reduction in uplift to fall anywhere between 5 and 20%, and the actual amount of uplift that was reduced was 9%. And I'm only bringing that up to say that between 5 and 20% is still a pretty broad range. So even when you've implemented the code and gone through the process of you're much closer to actually running this live, it still doesn't guarantee that you have a really tight estimate about what the impacts are going to look like. You certainly have a better understanding than you do before you have it, but just trying not to sort of oversell, the tightness with which any market can sort of estimate once implementation sort of let loose what the impact will be, if that helps.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alva. James, let's go ahead and keep moving forward here.
All right. Next slide, please. The CAISO's analysis found quite large geographic differences as well, where impacts are felt larger in the Southwest and the ISO BA because there's a higher concentration of fast start gas units in those in balancing areas in those regions, and less so in the Pacific Northwest. Then also the constant amortization method had a much larger impact than the other two methods, more or less because, as we've discussed quite a bit, the constant amortization method double counts some costs. And so just want to point out that we'll discuss in Mike's presentation our high level takeaway is that really the integer relaxation and the modified offer curve using the minimum average cost approach should generally produce the same results, at least as it relates to energy prices. Next slide, please. So I think this is my last slide, and we just want to circle back on uplift payments. That was a big conversation with the other markets. The CAISO's analysis did not directly estimate the impact of fast start pricing on bid cost recovery payments. It is the PFE team's belief that fast start pricing should lead to a reduction in bid cost recovery payments, but the overall reduction in total bid cost recovery may be moderate. That is because the CAISO's analysis shows that fast start gas units make up a relatively small share of overall bid cost recovery payments, and the Department of Market Monitoring estimates that economic commitments of fast start gas units account for less than half of the BCR payments paid to those units. And so majority of the BCR paid to those units are coming from things like, minimum online constraints or other self-schedules, base schedules, or other sorts of reliability requirements, and not, the market making an economic decision to commit those units. We also want to point out that while we would expect bid cost recovery payments to decrease under fast start pricing because the LMP is now covering some of those costs, that the decrease is likely to be less than the increase in total costs paid through the higher LMP. And so the expectation is that not necessarily that the change in uplift would completely offset the increases in the prices paid through the LMP.
Thank you very much, James. So great presentation. Again, we will have some Q&A time. We ate a little bit into it at the end, so you can keep mulling this over in your minds. But Stuart, I see your hand. Let's go ahead and go to you. Let's address any questions on any of the items that James presented before we hand it over to Mike.
James, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
James, is it fair to say that the BCR payments might decrease, but there's there's likely to be increases in other uplift payments, you know, similar to the PGM experience or whatever, and to prevent, you know, price chasing and all that good stuff. So this is maybe just one facet. This is one part of a decrease, but there's increases elsewhere. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, to the extent that the ISO implemented a settlement mechanism to account for lost opportunity costs, and I'll note that that PJM and ISO New England do have that as a settlement mechanism, but the other markets do not. And so it would not be extraordinary for the ISO not to have that as a settlement mechanism. Now, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't. I'm just saying that it will depend on a design choice that we make.
Yeah, fair point. And then the other aspect of this from the MISO analysis, they didn't seem to normalize the gas prices. So my takeaway was, when I look at their analysis of price increases, I kind of need to take it with a grain of salt, because it depends on what the gas price was doing, was my takeaway from their presentation. Is that a fair understanding when it came to looking at those price increases, that the gas prices hadn't been normalized over the years to isolate the true impact?
I would say I'm not 100% confident on the reality of the MISO numbers, but I will say that it does make perfect sense to me that, you know, the PJM Market Monitor did a pretty detailed breakout of, you know, specifically what factors were impacting LMPs. And that, I think, in order to really isolate the impact of fast start pricing, is probably necessary. Now, at the same time, you know, in comparing sort of, if you're doing simple comparisons of, you know, pricing run prices relative to dispatch run prices, the gas prices in those runs are going to be the same. And so, like, within that time frame, you have a pretty good sense of what the incremental cost of fast start pricing might look like. But I agree that over time, you know, over time, in trying to compare differences over time where gas prices may change, you know, it may not be, yeah, then there may be some factors there that are at play, like you mentioned.
And then just last comment, I mean, this is obviously a multi-year effort. There's a lot of complexity, serious concerns about the unintended consequences here at a time when CAISO's doing a lot, their staff are doing a lot, and it just seems a lot to take on. It's almost trying to get a sense of, because I picked up an Alva's comment, it's like, well, maybe it's the regions with gas resources or whatever are pushing this, but in talking to some folks, I'm not so clear who's actually pushing for the fast start pricing. So I wonder at some point in this process if it may be worth taking a poll, given the level of complexity, the level of effort, the potential unintended consequences here with this particular aspect of the PFE. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a fair suggestion. And yeah, I'll just mention one that I don't anticipate a poll of sorts, but we will, you know, be taking formal comment on fast start pricing here coming up here. And so it gives the opportunity for everyone participating in this working group to provide their feedback on the direction things are going. And if that perspective is that there are other items that the ISO should prioritize over fast start pricing, then that's a fair response. And if it's, you know, the fast start pricing is the most important thing that we could be working on right now, that's also a fair response. So we'll sort of look through those comments to make sure we get a good pulse about how folks are feeling about the trajectory of things.
Yeah, well said, James. We're going the same direction with it, and we'll take those comments as the reflection. So, okay, very good. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much, James. Let's go ahead and queue up Mr. Convolater. Mike, thanks for preparing your presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Hey, thank you. If we can bring up the other presentation. There we go. All right. So there's really three things that were issues. Let's go to the next slide, please. So there were really three things that really spoke to me in looking at the presentations that were issues that I thought really that were most important for the current state of discussion of fast start pricing. And so I'm going to go through each of those. One of them is assessing different approaches for setting LMPs. We'll talk about relaxing integer constraints, and then finally about offline, permitting offline units, offline fast start generators to be considered when you're setting prices. So let's just go into the first of those, the assessing different approaches for setting LMPs. Next slide, please. And the slide after that. So yeah, I'm going to go through the first few slides fairly quickly because I think James already covered this a lot in his presentation. The fundamental issue that we have is non-convexities, that we need to come up with procedures for setting prices that accommodate non-convexities. And these are some of the examples of non-convexities. Next slide. And so when we don't have any non-convexities, it's easy actually. You should be able to find a price that's going to clear the market, that's going to set supply equal to demand. And another way of seeing that you have supply equal to demand is that we won't have anybody with lost opportunity costs. We won't have any generators that are saying, gee, at that LMP, why didn't I run? My offer was less than the LMP. I would have made money. I'm unhappy. I lost profits. And on the flip side, you wouldn't have to have any bid cost recovery payments. We wouldn't have any situations where generators were dispatched, even though the LMP revenue they received does not recover their bid costs. And so when there's no non-convexities, you should be able to find a market clearing price. No bid cost recovery payments needed, no lost opportunity costs incurred by anybody. Next slide. When we do have non-convexities, well, you still may be able to find a market clearing price. It's not a guarantee that you can't. You may be able to in the presence of non-convexities. And if there is a market clearing price, the market should actually come up with that mechanism. That really should be the market clearing price that is developed in the market. A couple of the proposed procedures for implementing fast start pricing could, at least in some examples, give you LMPs that don't clear the market, even though there is a market clearing LMP. And that can produce incentives for inefficiency. Next slide. So this simple example I'm going to use to illustrate this, everybody's at one location, so we don't need to concern ourselves with locational differences. I've got two non-fast start generators and one fast start generator. And I should mention, by the way, this is actually not the example I used in my memo. I mean, it is referenced in the footnote to the memo, but it's in putting the presentation together, I felt that this one was more helpful. So we have 675 megawatts of load to be met. And so we have G1, it's our least expensive generator, and it can produce 500 megawatts at $35. And so it does that. And then our alternatives, we can go ahead, what we do is we go ahead and we have a fast start generator. It's got $7,000 in minimum load cost to run at 100 megawatts. So that's $70 per megawatt hour. And then it can produce another 50 megawatts at $40. It does that. And then it can produce another 50 megawatts on top of that at $80. And so it's dispatched to produce a total of 175 megawatts, 100 megawatts at PMIN. It goes through the entire 50 megawatt first dispatchable segment and half of the way through the second dispatchable segment. So it's producing 175 megawatts. So in this situation, we have an LMP that clears the market. It's $80. At $80, G1 says, yeah, I'm happy to produce 500 megawatts at that level. And the fast start generator, it is saying, well, yeah, I can produce anywhere between 150 and 200 megawatts. And so the total amount that is provided at an LMP of 80 megawatts is anywhere between 650 and 700 megawatts, which is good because we have a 675 megawatts of demand. And so we can set At a price of $80 per megawatt hour, we can set supply equal to demand. There are no lost opportunity costs. Nobody lost any profits because they were not dispatched, even though their bid was less than the LMP. We have no BCR payments because nobody's losing money. Nobody has a situation where their overall offer cost exceeds their LMP revenue. So we have an LMP that clears the market in this situation. Next slide. So the constant adder approach, just to recap briefly, takes the cost of operating at your minimum output level plus any allocated startup costs. I've assumed that's $7,000 in this example. Divides that over your 200 megawatt hour output. That's the full output of the fast start generator. Comes up with a $35 adder. And then it adds that to the incremental offers that have been submitted. So, for example, the fast start generator submitted an offer of $40 for its first incremental block and $80 for its second incremental block. So it adds 35 to each of those, gives you to 75 and 115. It uses that $75 not just for the first incremental block, but also for the PMIN block. And so under the constant adder approach, we would replace the actual offer submitted for the fast start generator with an offer that says, I'll run at $75 for the first 150 megawatts and then $115 for the last 50 megawatts. Well, if you were to stick that into this dispatch, into the pricing pass, into the pricing run, what you would get is a situation where actually that second generator that has a $110 offer is on the margin. We'd go ahead and we dispatch the fast start generator to run at 150, but that last incremental block at 115 is too expensive, and so the generator 2 would run at 110. It doesn't run in reality, but it would run in this pricing pass. So we would get an LMP of $110. Next slide. The adjusted constant adder approach is a little bit different. It says that that adder has some double counting. If we're going to go ahead and include the minimum load cost and the startup cost, what we need to do is we need to subtract off the value of the PMIN block times the first incremental offer. And we're doing that because you're already adding it to the assumption that you're going to assume that the PMIN block is already operating at $40 per megawatt hour when you're determining the adder. So it doesn't make sense to also include that number in the adder. So it gets an adder of $15 per megawatt hour under the adjusted constant adder approach. And so in that case, when we do the pricing pass, when we do the pricing run, we no longer have a situation where G2 is dispatched. We go ahead and we actually have the same dispatch that we have in reality, where G1 produced 500 megawatts and the fast start generator produces 175 megawatts. But even though it's the same dispatch that we had in reality, the LMP is different. We're using different prices. And so the modified offer for the second incremental block is 95. The actual offer was 80. And so it sets the LMP at $95, not at $80. So again, we have a $95 price. Next slide. And so we had a $110 price produced by the constant adder approach, a $95 price produced by the adjusted constant adder approach. Neither one of those is going to clear the market. And in particular, they're both going to result in lost opportunity costs because they don't clear the market. In this case, what happened was this fast start generator was dispatched to produce 175 megawatts, but it still got 25 megawatts of undispatched capacity that was offered at $80. And so when the LMP is either $110 or $95, the fast start generator is saying, hey, I wish I'd run it at 200 megawatts. I would have made more money. So I've lost profits because I was dispatched at 175 megawatts when my profit maximizing level of dispatch would have been 200 megawatts. And so that's the consequence of having a non-market clearing price that is determined using either one of those two approaches for coming up with fast start pricing bids. Next slide. And so when you have situations like this, where you have lost opportunity costs, this can provide an incentive for inefficient behavior. Now, one way to take care of this is to pay the generator for the lost opportunity cost. In this case, you'd say, hey, fast start generator, you could have produced 25 megawatts, and you would have made an additional profit as a consequence of that. We will go ahead and pay that amount to you. If you don't do that, well, then in situations where generators are losing money because they weren't dispatched up to their profit maximizing level, they have an incentive to go ahead and essentially try to manipulate's a judgmental term, modify their bids in a way that increases the amount of energy their dispatch should produce. If you can go ahead and make money operating at 200, more profit at 200 than at 175 megawatts, you may do things to go ahead and make sure that you are scheduled to operate at 200. But as we know, the most efficient actual dispatch for this unit is 175. And so it's giving you an incentive to try to do things that will maximize your profit, but that will be inefficient. And so to the extent that we were to calculate LMPs in this example in a manner that doesn't clear markets and causes lost opportunity costs to arise, we're giving generators an incentive to offer their capacity in a way that undermines the ISO's attempts to try to meet load at the least cost possible, because we're giving people an incentive to try to offer their capacity in a way that doesn't reflect their actual cost structure. Next slide, please. Now, I talked about two of the mechanisms for fast start pricing. The third one is minimum average cost. And so how minimum average cost would work in this circumstance is we would say, well, again, we had a $7,000 bid. $7,000 was your minimum load cost and any portion of the startup cost that was allocated to the first to the fast start generator. So it's got $7,000 in commitment costs. Does that minimize the cost of operating that unit? No, that would be $7,000 divided by 100 megawatts. That's $70 per megawatt hour. What actually minimizes the average cost of operating the unit is for it to also produce 150 megawatts, to produce another 50 megawatts at a cost of $40 a megawatt hour. That brings your total cost up to $9,000. You're spreading that over 150 megawatt hours, and so that's an average cost of $60 per megawatt hour. And so under the minimum average cost approach, just to remind folks, what would happen in this case is that the modified offer that's used in the pricing pass for the fast start generator would be $60 for the first 150 megawatts of output. And then the actual offer that was submitted, $80 for everything for above 150 megawatts of output. So the minimum average cost is used to reflect your modified offer up to the output level that minimizes your average cost, 150 here. And then the actual offer is used. The modified offer is equal to the average. The modified offer is equal to the actually submitted offer for all output levels above that 150 megawatts. And so if you do that here, you can see that, okay, what happens in this pricing pass if I go ahead and replace the actual offer with the modified offer? Well, I'd run G1 for 500 megawatts. Again, it's offered at $35. It's the cheapest unit. I run it for 500 megawatts. My next choice is to run the fast start generator for the PMIN and the Inc1 blocks are offered at $60. So that's 150 megawatts of output. Another 25 megawatts of output comes from the $80 Inc2 block. And so the LMP is going to be set by that second block, its modified offer, which is equal to its actual offer of $80. So in this case, what the minimum average cost does is it actually produces the price that does clear the market. So in this case, the other approaches to fast start pricing don't give you prices that clear the market. The minimum average cost approach does come up with the price that clears the market. So you can see that this is part of the motivation for the minimum average cost approach, is that it actually develops prices that will clear markets when there is a price that will clear the market, when such a price exists. You don't necessarily get that. In fact, often you won't get that from the other two approaches for doing fast start pricing and developing the modified offer curve for using fast start pricing. Next slide. Now, while it may be possible to come up with a price that clears the market, it also may not be possible to come up with such a price. There are many examples of this. And when that happens, either one or more generators is going to incur lost opportunity costs, or one or more generators is going to require BCR payments, or both. Both can happen. And both of these have their downsides. They both may provide incentives for inefficient behavior. This is something that cannot be avoided. It's an inescapable consequence of non-convexities. We're going to have situations where there is no market clearing price. We need to come up with a mechanism for settling the market anyway, and it's not going to be perfect. There is no silver bullet. And so there are going to be, adverse incentives for inefficient behaviors that result when we have to either have lost opportunity costs or make BCR payments. Having said that, that doesn't mean that all answers are therefore equal. Exactly how you set the prices in those circumstances can have a significant impact on how large those lost opportunity costs are, how large the BCR payments are, and how significant the incentives for inefficient behavior are. And so while it may be impossible to have the perfect answer, that does not mean that all answers are the same. Some answers are closer or better than others. Next slide. So let's consider this example. This is one in which no LMP clears the market. So what I've done here is I've made a couple of changes to the previous example. I lowered the load a little bit to 625, and the fast start generator, I increased its PMIN to 150. So I basically, the PMIN block ate the first incremental block. So the minimum level of output is 150. The total cost of operating at 150 is 9,000. That's the same as what it was before. If you were operating at 150, that's an average cost of $60 per megawatt hour times 150 is 9,000. But you can see what happens here is because I've increased the PMIN and because I've decreased the load, we have a situation where I need to go ahead, and the cheapest way to do this actually happens to be to go ahead and run that fast start generator at 150 megawatts. But that means I've only got 475 megawatts of load left to be met. And so I can only run GU1 at 475. So it's been necessary, because of these assumptions that I've made, to back down GU1 a little bit to accommodate that 150 megawatt PMIN from the fast start generator. Next slide. So there's no LMP that's going to clear the market in this case. At a price of 35, GU1 is willing to generate, and as the price increases, it continues to be willing to generate. So it's willing to supply 500 megawatts. We're not going to get a bump up of the supply until we get to $60 per megawatt hour. At that point, that's where the fast start generator says, okay, fine, now you covered my costs. Now I'm willing to produce 150 megawatts. And so your total supply has just leaped from 500 megawatts to 650. The problem is that we have 625 megawatts of demand, and so we just hopped over the level of demand that we need. We can get 500 megawatts at prices below $60. We can get 650 megawatts at prices of $60 or above. There is no price that corresponds to 625. So there is no LMP that clears the market in this example. And that means that we are going to have either lost opportunity costs or BCR payments. It has to be at least one of those things has to happen because there's no LMP that clears the market in this example due to the non-convexities. Next slide. So if we use fast start pricing, and I'm going to assume from now on, I'll usually mention it, that the fast start pricing is assuming that we come up with the modified offer curve using the minimum average cost approach. The LMP is going to be $60 per megawatt hour in this example. So what's going to happen is that you can see that we're going to go ahead with the PMIN relaxed. The fast start generator is going to be on the margin. We don't have to go in the fast start. In the pricing pass, we relax the G1s, the PMIN constraint. And so what can happen in this case is that G1 would go ahead and be dispatched to produce 500 megawatts because we relaxed that fast start generator's PMIN constraint. Then the fast start generator generates another 125 megawatts with the PMIN block that meets your 625 megawatts of load. The offer that is on the margin is the modified offer we use for the PMIN, which is that $60 minimum average cost. And so the LMP is $60 per megawatt hour in this example if we use fast start pricing. Next slide. Does this clear the market? No, of course not. I told you it's not going to clear the market. So it is just high enough that we don't have any BCR payments. We're paying $60 to the fast start generator. Its average cost of operating is $60 per megawatt hour. So we don't need to make any BCR payments to the fast start generator, or anybody. But there is a lost opportunity cost. If there's a $60 price, then G1 is saying, hey, I bid 35. I wish I'd been dispatched at 500. You only dispatched me at 475. I have a lost opportunity cost because I wish I'd run 25 megawatts more at that output level. I could have made $25 in profit for each one of those megawatts at a price of 60. My offer is 35. There's a $25 difference. So I lost $25 times 25 megawatts. I lost $625 in lost opportunity costs as a consequence of that. Now, one way to solve this is to say that, well, we'll pay you $625. If we don't do that, well, then there may be incentives for generators in situations like this to take actions to increase their dispatch levels, whether it's through modifying their bids, increasing their minimum output level, but to do things that would essentially cause, that would affect the dispatch and would cause us to deviate from what is the least cost dispatch, which is to run G1 to produce 475 megawatts. So there's a downside that's associated with setting the price at $60, which is what the fast start pricing approach would do. It does result in these lost opportunity costs that produce incentives for inefficient behavior. Next slide. But let's look at the alternative. The alternative is to say, let's not use fast start pricing. In that case, what would the LMP be in this situation? Well, we're going to run again G1 to produce 475 megawatts, and the fast start generator is going to produce 150. The total amount that we've produced is 625, which meets load. If we have a 626 megawatt of load, how are we going to meet it? We're going to meet it by increasing generation at G1. We'll go from 475 to 476. And so if you don't use fast start pricing, G1 is going to be setting the price. The LMP is going to be G1's offer of $35 per megawatt hour. So there are no lost opportunity costs at this LMP. G1 doesn't have an incentive to increase its output at a price of 35. It's saying, well, 475 is fine. If you want to increase me up, that's fine. But I'm not losing money as a result of the fact that you dispatched me down below my 500 megawatt Pmax. So there's no lost opportunity cost. But the fast start generator is going to receive a large VCR payment in this case. This is being paid only $35 a megawatt hour. That's the LMP in this approach. And its average cost, $9,000 divided by 150 megawatts, that's a $60 per megawatt hour average cost. So it's $25 short. It needs a $25 per megawatt hour VCR times 150 megawatts. It needs a $3,750 VCR payment to make up for the fact that the LMP is only $35 and its average cost is $60. So it's got a big VCR payment that it's going to require. Next slide. So what this means is that we really effectively have two different prices that are being used for the supplement. On one hand, G1 is getting $35 per megawatt hour. And on the other hand, the fast start generator, well, it's getting $35 plus another $25 in VCR payments, a total of $60 per megawatt hour. I'm using the term price discrimination as the head of this slide. And price discrimination, usually it's used in a different context. It's used in the context of what prices do you charge somebody? So, for example, let's suppose you're running a movie theater. This is the classic example. You're running a movie theater, and you've got some customers that are more price sensitive and some that are less price sensitive. And so what you do is you say, I'm going to go ahead and charge a lower price to kids. I'm going to say that families are going to be more price sensitive. And so if you're under 12, you have to pay less. And if you're over 12, you have to pay more. That's a general concept behind price discrimination. Charge higher prices to people who are less responsive to prices. Of course, the problem there is that, when you're 12 or 13 or 14, you can't card a kid. They generally don't have ID. You can't look at their driver's license. And so they have an incentive to say, yeah, I'm 12. Now, at some point, you can't get away with that anymore. But it can be difficult to go ahead and enforce that. The people who are getting charged the higher price, they'd rather be charged the lower price. And they have an incentive to try to take actions to make sure they are charged the lower price. Well, here in this circumstance, we have the flip side of that. We're paying one generator less and the other generator more. And G1 is looking at this and saying, hey, I'd rather get $60 per megawatt hour. If the fast start generator can get it, why can't I? So G1 has an incentive to go ahead and increase its offer to $60 per megawatt hour. And it could do that and it would still be dispatched to produce the same 475 megawatts that it's producing. So to respond to the question of, well, isn't this an exercise of market power? Is it? It's not withholding any capacity. It's still generating the same amount it was generating before. All it's trying to do is get the same price that is being paid to the fast start generator. It's simply trying to get the same $60 price that is being paid to another generator in this circumstance. So it's certainly not clear to me that this is an example of an exercise of market power, that this is withholding. Next. What this reminds me of, and what I think is important to think about here. Yes, is there a question?
Sorry, Mike. Yes, there is a question in the queue. If we
Okay.
could go to the question.
Hey, good morning, Mike. This is JQ Wang from PG&E. Thank you so much for the example. It's very interesting to see how the market could not exist a clearing LMP. I have a quick question on your comments of slide 19.
Can you go back, please?
So,
go back to this previous slide.
So in this particular case, will there be a solution for you to settle a price, or there's basically, you know, because how the example is set up, there's no solution that we can. I guess I understand there will be like no clearing price, but is there a way to set a price so the market inefficiency is minimized?
Right. Well, and can we go to the previous slide, please? I'm still seeing slide 20. Can we go to slide 19? Slide 19, please. Thank you. Yeah, so there's I think that's what I'm talking about really, is that, you know, there is no perfect price. We will have either we won't have a market clearing price, we will have BCR payments, or we will have lost opportunity costs. And so I think it makes sense in those circumstances to assess, okay, so to what extent are we, let's go ahead and try to select the price that is the best price that we can select, the one that entails the least deviation between, you know, the actual market outcome that essentially provides the least incentive for inefficient behavior. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to go ahead and describe here.
Oh, I apologize. I was jumping ahead of you.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was thinking one possibility is to look at the total market operation cost, not at the bid cost is calculated in the last column, but if you calculated by paying the LMP to all the megawatts that's dispatched, plus either the big cost of recovery or the lost opportunity cost, what will be a lower total market operating cost? Do you think that will be a possible way to determine, or that's not, I understand it's not a complete equivalency of the market efficiency, but yeah.
Yeah, I get concerned about that. And actually, I'll probably, the next slide is actually going to get into that for a little bit here. So let's, because I'm concerned that if we do it that way, then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be, that's going to favor a mechanism that would come up with lower prices all the time and then just make BCR payments when necessary to make people whole up to their offers. And I think the problem with that, and can we go to slide 20? Yeah, and so what this reminds me of is some of the discussions that we actually had at the very, you know, beginning of design of many of these markets. You know, it used to be, you know, before we, you know, put in these LMP-based markets, you might have a situation where somebody's bidding $30 and the LMP is 50. And so people would say, well, why are we paying them $50? Why pay them a market clearing price? Why not just pay them 30? That'll be cheaper. That'll save us money. The thing is that when we pay market clearing prices, we give generators incentive, and I have to go ahead and include a caveat if they're not exercising market power, and that's an issue that needs to be dealt with. But putting that aside for the moment, generators have an incentive to bid their actual costs. So if your actual cost is 30 and you bid that in, and the price is above 30, you'll run, and the price is below 30, you won't run. And in both circumstances, you'll be happy with that outcome. You'll run when you're supposed to, and you can make a profit, and you won't run when you're not supposed to, and you won't make a profit. Whereas the generators are paid with their bid, well, okay, I'm that generator with a $30 cost and the LMP is 50. What should I bid? Should I continue to bid 30? Not if it means I'm going to be paid 30. What I should bid is, if I know the price is going to be 50, I should bid 50 or maybe 49.99. Because, so what is giving people an incentive to do if we do have pay as bid is that we are giving them an incentive to go ahead and bid their guests, and they might shade it down a little bit to make sure they get dispatched, but essentially we're giving them an incentive to go ahead and bid their forecast of what the market clearing price is going to be, even if they're not trying to exercise market power. If I go ahead and I take this, this can be a very, very small generator with no influence on market power. And nevertheless, if you're going to pay it its bid, it should change its bidding strategy. It should bid more. It should bid its guess more or less of the market clearing cost. And it's going to be inefficient because it doesn't have perfect knowledge. It's not going to know exactly that, gee, I should bid $49.99 because the LMP is going to be 50. It might submit a $50 bid thinking it's going to be dispatched, and whoops, guess too high. The LMP is actually 45. You're not running. Well, that means that somebody else who's more expensive is running. And so it's inefficient. And so what that would actually do is it would, as a result, people thought it would decrease the cost. It would actually increase the cost of that load would have to pay, because we would decrease the efficiency and tend to increase LMPs because we would be dispatching less efficient resources and not dispatching more efficient resources simply because they guessed too high in their bids. And the other thing that it does is it completely frustrates attempts to assess whether bids are consistent with competitive behavior, because, how do you tell whether somebody was behaving competitively or not? Maybe their bid was simply because they were overestimating what the LMP was going to be. So this is one of the great things about, the market clearing price-based markets, is that, again, if you're not exercising market power, it gives you an incentive to actually bid your actual cost structure, which allows you to basically which allows you to go ahead and assess who are the people who don't seem to be bidding in a way that's consistent with competitive behavior, and focus your mitigation, your analysis upon them. So yeah, circling back to your question here. So if we were to just look at essentially paying people, what would minimize what we pay people plus their BCR payments, well, that would drive you towards a mechanism that pays people as little as possible and then pays them a BCR payment to bring them back up to their bid. So I think that would eventually get you to what you would eventually get out of that would be something that would just sum up all the bids. And what that would do is that would change people's behavior, as I've described here, so they would bid differently.
Okay, that's very fair. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Were there any more questions, or should I go ahead?
We do have another question in queue,
Okay.
Mike. Let's go ahead and unmute Sybil.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for this presentation. I was wondering, as we're linking this to the broader price formation enhancements initiative and some of the market power mitigation updates that the CAISO markets are considering, if staff could discuss this trade-off a little bit in the context of the market power mitigation updates.
I'm going to have to pass that question to somebody else, I think.
And if you're not prepared to do that today, it may be helpful to have that as a topic for a future conversation as we tie this all together. Likewise, I think PGP, and sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. This is Sybil from PGP. We're also interested in understanding a little bit better some of the trade-offs introduced with fast start pricing versus, for example, the ability to implement some of the scarcity concepts, such as improved flexible ramping, price formation, for example. So I don't know if you could link this back to the market power mitigation concept a bit, James. That would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll provide just sort of a high level, and we can get into more details. But I think as Mike is expressing that, the concept here is related to incentives. Having the market rules in such a way to make sure that the incentives are for generators offer their actual cost to facilitate market monitoring and market power mitigation. And of course, we want to make sure as we move through the fast start pricing design that we adhere to that core principle. As it relates specifically to the market power discussions we're having in elsewhere in the price formation initiative, we will also need to learn a bit more. It was actually something that wasn't really touched much on in the market monitor presentations from MISO and PJM about how their market power mitigation procedures incorporate fast start pricing. And so we should circle back to make sure that we understand what's being implemented across the markets on that. And then, of course, scarcity pricing too. There are implications of price for fast start pricing on scarcity pricing. In one way, it was talked about already with the sort of offline component that MISO has implemented. But there are, in general, times where you're going to be in scarce conditions, and also times where you're going to be relying on fast start units. During peak demand times where you may have the market clearing price could be set either by scarcity pricing levels or fast start pricing from these sort of methods. So also say that we agree that there are connections here between the other two topics, and we'll make space to dig into those more deeply down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Should I keep going, Juan?
Yeah, Mike, go ahead. No further questions.
Okay, let's go to the next slide then. So, whenever we got BCR payments, and we're going to have BCR payments with fast start pricing or not, but whenever we have BCR payments, there's going to be aspects of a pay-as-bid system, because some generators are getting the BCR and some are not. And so some generators are getting a different price than others. But you can get much more significant concerns along these lines if you don't use fast start pricing. Because what happens is that you increase the gap between the prices different generators are paid. And that's going to increase the incentive for them to submit bids that don't actually reflect their costs. And so I've got another example here, if we can go to the next slide, that really, I think, kind of drives this home. And I didn't include this in the memo, so this is like a bonus you get for actually coming to the presentation here. I thought the memo was getting a bit long, but I did want to include this here. So let's consider this example. So what I've done here, again, we've got 625 megawatts of load, same as in the example I was just talking about. But I've now gone back to relaxing that PMIN. It's back down to 100 instead of being 150. Inco One has reappeared at a cost of $40 a megawatt hour for 50 megawatts. So because I went ahead and relaxed, reduced the PMIN, now we're in a situation where we don't have to back G1 down to 475 anymore. It can operate at 500 megawatts. The fast start generator, it produces 100 megawatts at PMIN, and then another 25 megawatts using that $40 per megawatt hour block. And that's how we meet our load of 625 megawatts. So G1's running at 500. The fast start generator is running at 125. Next slide. Okay, so if we don't use fast start pricing, what's the LMP? Well, it's $40. If we had additional load, we would dispatch up that first incremental output block of fast start generator. We would go from 25 to 26, cost $40. So your LMP would be $40. Would you have any lost opportunity costs if you did this? You would not. But the BCR payment, well, the fast start generator, when it's running at 125, its average cost is it costs $7,000 to run at its PMIN, and then another $1,000, $40 times 25 megawatts, another $1,000 to produce another 25 megawatts. So that's a total of $8,000 in cost. You divide that by 125 megawatt hours, you get to $64 a megawatt hour. So it's got a $64 per megawatt hour cost when it's running at 125. It's got a $40 LMP. So your BCR payment is going to be 64 minus 40 times the whole 125 megawatts. It's going to be a $3,000 BCR payment. Now, G1 has really strong incentives to increase its revenue in this case. It's getting the $40 LMP it looks at the fast start generator getting $64 per megawatt hour once we include its PCR payment. And it's saying, gee, if I went ahead and increased my offer, I could be able to increase my profits. Or if I were to, increase my PMIN, I would be able to increase my profits to make sure I don't get dispatched below 500 megawatts. So G1 has a very strong incentive to take actions to increase its revenue. As opposed to getting $40, it would like to get something more like $64. So if we don't use fast start pricing in this example, we provide strong incentives for generators that are not attempting to exercise market power to increase their revenue. And to see that it's not attempting to exercise its market power, suppose the G1 was split into 500 little clones, each one 1 megawatt wide. Do they have an incentive to increase their offers? Yeah, they do. So let's go to the next slide.
Mike, real quick, we do have a hand. Do you want to go to the next slide as a continuation, or do you want to take this now, Mike?
Was there a question? Yeah, let's go to the question.
There was. Okay, Alva, let's go ahead and unmute Alva. Go ahead, Alva.
Yeah, I have two things I would like you to, I don't know if you want to, probably not engage with these examples, but the examples raise the issue to me. So I'm just bringing it up in that context. And I'm sorry to sort of interrupt the argument, but one is, does the strength of your assertions about the benefits of fast start pricing really exist in the setting of the CAISO, where minimum load and startup costs are registered costs, and essentially there isn't the ability to increase those values based on opportunity cost. So that's one element that I'd ask you to I don't know what the answer is. To me it seems that's would be a strong. I mean, I'm familiar with the idea that pay as bid is not a good incentive system in general, but I think in a case where a lot of costs are already locked down, I don't see the effects being that strong. The one that really concerns me is if you have a system where you have battery charging that is essentially being in this example, the battery is being charged because the cost seen in the cost optimization is 40, and then it gets charged 60, even though it was not willing to charge at 60. That seems problematic with this whole approach. And if you have a system which is heavily dependent on battery charging, I'm just not seeing how this system really holds up.
Yeah, well, I'd say that is, with regard to the first of those issues, I would think I would need to sort of take under advisement. But the second issue with the battery charging, I mean, that would be a situation where you might be scheduling somebody to charge their battery at 40, and then they're actually being charged a price that is different than that. And so this is kind of the flip side of a lost opportunity cost. This is from, it's acting as a load in the circumstance. This is, but again, it's a situation just like a generator that, might not be dispatched, even though it could have profitably operated. This is a situation where the battery was instructed, was told to withdraw energy, even though it ends up doing so at a price that is higher than the maximum amount it was willing to pay to do that. And so to the extent that you're going to have lost opportunity costs, it would make sense to go ahead and, either you go ahead and compensate somebody for that, or you may give them an incentive for inefficient behavior if you don't do that. So it is of a piece with the incentives that result from lost opportunity costs, the possibility for inefficient incentives that result from having lost opportunity cost payments. It's just the flip side of it.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't see that this is necessary. Is there some sort of intermediate solution which minimizes the lost opportunity costs on both sides if you have that kind of a system? Or because it seems so supply focused, and like I said, our supply costs are so controlled already that I'm not really seeing the benefits here.
Yeah, I don't.
Becky, I see your hand. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead.
Finish your thought. Go ahead.
There's another question. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've got a reaction here from Becky. Becky, go ahead and if we could unmute her.
Hey, good morning. Becky Robinson here with the ISO. Alva, I really appreciate your questions on storage throughout this morning, and I think they reminded me that, we had in an earlier sort of schedule previewing, a variety of topics that we wanted to dig into related to fast start pricing. Interactions with storage resources is one of those topics, and we haven't sort of had that deep dive into that interaction yet. I know it's come up a little bit in our conversations, but your questions are reminding me that not that we'd forgotten, but it is a really relevant question. Certainly relevant to thinking about implementing fast start pricing in the CAISO markets and in the broader, regional Western markets, where we do see a lot of storage penetration, unlike markets in the East, and which even Eastern markets that are getting storage now, it wasn't necessarily on their minds when they were putting fast start pricing in place. So I guess your question about battery charging, I think, is a really good one. I do also wonder, though, kind of connecting back with James's review of Guillermo and team's analysis that we did on fast start pricing. To me, I think one of the takeaways there was that fast start pricing, you see it happening more in the evening ramp hours and during peak times. And so I don't know, I think it would be a great empirical question, but excuse me, is it the case that you would sort of rationally expect to have batteries charging during hours where fast start resources are getting economically dispatched and where you see fast start pricing sort of kicking in, if you will? Or is it the case that those are kind of different sets of hours, so that this empirically or as a practical matter may be less of a problem? I don't know. I think the takeaway from the analysis is that maybe we should think of those generally as happening in different sets of hours. But I think it is certainly still a good and relevant question that we would want to make sure we have a good understanding of. But curious of your thoughts as to whether you would expect those to both happen at the same time. But I think the analysis goes to the point that maybe those would just be separate sets of hours as a general matter. And Mike, appreciate your thoughts there too.
I think there's a lot of validity to that. But on the other hand, there's these periods where thermal resources are at minimum, which is also part of kind of what's being considered here. And they're trying to cover their I mean, what you might be right. I'm just thinking of like periods where you're like bridging uneconomic operation periods for thermal resources, and so you get some combination of periods which are entitled where fast start pricing is having an effect on prices to raise prices, and at the same time those are really periods where the most economic thing to be happening would be charging of batteries. But I'm really talking off the top of my head, so I think that's a good thing to look at in the analysis, actually. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to get an example. It wasn't really intended for this, but it kind of indirectly hits it, but looks at the other side, which is essentially the revenue that the battery's receiving when it's discharging. And I think that first, I agree with your general concept, Alva, but I also think that Becky is right. That is probably a relatively unusual circumstance for batteries to be charging in hours in which fast start generators are running. And when we look at the flip side of it, the hours in which they're discharging, the consequence of fast start pricing is, well, if you don't use fast start pricing, what it tends to do is suppress prices. It mutes variability in prices, which, to the extent that your battery, that part of its business case is based upon being able to, buy low and sell high. Well, it's not going to be able to sell nearly as high if the prices are muted by not having fast start pricing. And so I would think that on the whole, when we take a look at the impact it has both in charging hours and discharging hours, that fast start pricing would tend to increase the revenue that you're going to be able to get when we look at it over the entire cycle.
Yeah, let's unmute Becky to continue this conversation, please.
Thanks, Alva and Mike. I appreciate that. Alva, just to respond to your point about thermal generators being online at their minimums. I think that is, again, a very relevant point. The only thing that brings to mind that I wanted to add in is just that I think that raises the issue that design questions about when you trigger fast start pricing may be really relevant. So for those for thermal resources that are online at minimum, for instance, that they're on for to provide reserves or for minimum online constraints. I know that's an issue where I think Scott Harvey from the Market Surveillance Committee has raised questions of, do you really want thermal resources that are on for those particular reasons and maybe only on for those particular reasons? Do you really want to sort of trigger fast start pricing in that instance, or would you want to carve that out separately to say, no, we don't really think that's appropriate. They're not on for reasons of the energy need, so to speak. So just highlighting that those design decisions might be relevant for thinking through that example. Thanks.
Okay. Shall I go ahead? Okay, I'm going to go ahead.
Yep, please.
So, all right, so there are, as you can see, there's, a large BCR payment, $30,000 that comes about if we use the $40 price. Next slide. If we use fast start pricing, this is going to be the same as the other examples. Again, this is again using the minimum average cost approach for defining the offer curve. The LMP is going to be $60, not $40. And so again, we have no lost opportunity costs, just as when we had a $40 price, but we have a much lower BCR payment. The fast start generator, it only has to recover $500 to get itself up to its bid cost rather than $3,000. So it's effectively getting $64, whereas G1 is getting $60. That significantly reduces the incentive for G1 to take actions to try to increase its revenue and decreases the possibility of inefficient dispatch if G1 essentially incorrectly assesses how much it can raise its bid without accidentally undispatching itself. So next slide, please. So I'd say, at least in this example, I think it's pretty clear that $60 is the more appropriate LMP. We get lower LMPs are going to increase the BCR payments and the increases for the incentives for other generators to increase their offers. Now, if we were to go above $60, that would be a little bit different. We decrease the BCR payment, but we get lost opportunity costs because at that point, the fast start generator is going to prefer to operate at 150 megawatts rather than 125. But given the choices between 60 and 40, I think at least in this example illustrates that $60 seems to make more sense. I was going to go to the next section. If there are any other questions on this section. All right, let's go to slide 26 and go to the next slide.
Sorry.
Was there a question?
I got
Sorry.
a slow unmute. Slow trigger on the unmute mic. My fault. Let's go ahead and unmute Bonnie, please.
Hi, Bonnie Blair. I work with the Six Cities Group. Question for you about the incentives for generator one to think about, trying to increase its prices. Are BCR payments transparent on a real-time basis so that is generator one going to know that the fast start unit is getting big BCR payments? I was not aware that it was, and therefore, why would it? How would it know?
It wouldn't necessarily, and that's part of the problem. If it knew perfectly, then it could go ahead and bid 1 penny below, what would maximize its profit and ensure it would continue to be dispatched and make as much money as possible. It doesn't know that, but it does know that by bidding its own costs, it's not maximizing its revenue. Because there are other generators that are being dispatched that are making more money. So it knows that bidding its own costs is no longer the profit maximizing strategy, and that gives it an incentive to do things that will undermine the ability of the ISO to operate the system as efficiently as possible.
But I guess the question is it, how big is that inefficiency? Is it gonna, first of all, if it doesn't know what BCR payments are until sometime later, it's got to make a kind of a
Trying to
guess,
figure it out.
a guess as to what, as to what its profit maximizing bids would have been.
Right.
And, is the,
And the bigger those payments, the more of an incentive it has to go ahead and try to make that guess. But it's a pretty hazy guess, as you said. And so that can easily backfire.
and how much, and so I guess in a way, the inefficiency, it strikes me, is very difficult to assess, quantify, understand. It's, yeah, maybe it's there, but is it going to increase generator one's bids by $2 or by $25?
I agree completely. Yeah, and that's part of the problem. We were talking earlier. I think this was one of the answers to when Stuart was asking questions earlier about doing some calculations. And the one thing we can't assess is, what would the impact of this of not having fast start pricing versus having it be upon bidding behavior. You're going to get different bidding behavior, and trying to assess exactly what it would be, as you've, I think, quite correctly pointed out, that's pretty hard.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something there.
No, I agree. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, no,
Oh,
go,
yes,
go ahead, Mike. And then we have a couple in the chat, but I think they're directed more to us. So why don't we go ahead and let you continue? And then Sybil and Lon, we do see your comments. We'll come back.
Okay. So second, this is, James talked about this at some detail with respect to the relaxing integer constraints. So I may skip a couple slides here, but let's take a look at the next one and see what's here. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, so we already talked about the general concept that essentially that, you could go ahead and we could, if in the pricing pass we were to set the commitment variable to 1/2, then for a fast start generator, then would incur half the startup costs, half the minimum load cost, and you could dispatch it anywhere between half of its true Pmin and half of its true Pmax. So let's go to the next slide. So this illustrates, this is the same example that we had, I think, back on slide 18, if I remember correctly. So we had an LMP of $60 using the modified offer curve, using, again, the MAC approach to coming up with the modified offer curve. $60 LMP. How does this work under integer constraint relaxation? Well, what we would do is we would get the dispatch shown below. And so this has the value of the FSG's commitment variable is 5/6. You commit 5/6 of the unit in this case. And that means that it can produce 5/6 of 150, which is 125 megawatts. That's its sort of modified capacity. And that's why we committed 5/6 of it, so that we could produce 125 megawatts with a fast start generator. That, in combination with the 500 megawatts we're getting from G1, gets you to the 625 megawatts that we need to meet load. If we had a 626 megawatt of load, what would happen under this approach? Well, you would commit that fast start generator a little bit more, as opposed to committing it 83.333%, which is 5/6. You would commit 84% of it. And why would you commit 84% of it? Because when you multiply 84% times 150, you get to 126 megawatts. So we're increasing the value of that commitment variable by 0.84 minus 0.83333. And the total cost of operating this unit at 150 megawatts is $9,000. So we take those difference between those two commitment variables, multiply it by $9,000, and we get, lo and behold, $60. So the LMP is $60. That's the same LMP that we calculated previously when we were using the modified offer approach. And so in this situation where we're only partially committing the unit, where we're committing it 5/6, we get the same approach, we get the same price, either under relaxing the integer commitment constraint, or if we use the modified offer curve. Same price either way. Now let's look at a different example where we don't have partial unit commitment. So that's the next slide, please. Okay, so now we bring the load up to 675. So when we relax the integer constraint, it can take any value between 0 and 1. So it doesn't have to be partially committed. And in this case, it says, well, given the choice anywhere between 0 and 1, I'm still going to choose 1. It makes sense to fully commit the unit. If you do that, then you can operate it at its 150 megawatt PMIN plus another 25 megawatts can be generated using its incremental segment. And so what we have here is really exactly the same answer that we got with the modified offer curve. You'll recall that in this case, when we had the higher load with the modified offer curve, we got that $80 per megawatt hour price that was that was the price that cleared markets. This is the example that I used when we had a market clearing price. We said the market clearing price was $80 per megawatt hour. That was the price we got without fast start pricing. That was the price we got with fast start pricing if we used a modified offer curve that was developed using the minimum average cost approach. And it is also the price that we get if we use fast start pricing under the integer constraint relaxation approach. They all give you the $80 price, which is the price you should get, which is the price that actually clears the markets. So what we've shown here, at least for these two examples, is that both with partially committing the fast start generator and with fully committing the fast start generator, we get the same price under fast start pricing, regardless of whether we use the modified offer curve or whether we use the relaxation of the integer constraint for the fast start generator. Next slide. But
Mike, you're spurring a lot of good thoughts here with your presentation, Mike. Let's go ahead and go to JK, please.
Thank you. This is JK Wang from PG&E. Mike, I have a quick question about your example here.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to slide 28.
Hey, can we go to slide 28, please? Thank you.
I was trying to understand the modified capacity here. I understand that for PMIN, you modify the capacity because it's in the unit commitment process, it's either a 0 or 1. But why do we modify the incremental capacity for fast start generator? Or put it another way, is it possible that you dispatch the incremental capacity before PMIN is fully used?
No, it's basically what we've done is we've put the fast start generator into the shrink machine. It's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but for generators. And so it's 5/6 of what it was before. And so its PMIN block would have been possible to produce 150 megawatts. Now it can produce 150 times 5/6, which is 125. And its incremental block earlier could have produced 50. Now it can produce 50 times 5/6, which is 41.67 megawatts. And so it doesn't get used because in this example, the $80 is the most expensive block that I've got out there. And so it doesn't make sense to go ahead and dispatch any of it. You just go ahead and you run the G1 to produce 500 megawatts. You run the shrunken portion of the PMIN for the fast start generator to produce 125 megawatts, which is all it can produce once you've 5/6 committed it. And that meets your 625 megawatts of load.
If in a case that your incremental offer is actually lower somehow than the more expensive units here, is it possible that you have it dispatched before you fully utilize the PMIN?
It wouldn't be dispatched before, but it could be dispatched along with. I didn't include it in this example, but so you'll recall in some of the previous examples, I had the PMIN being 100 megawatts, and then I had the first incremental block being 50 megawatts. We would have gotten the same answer if I had done that in this example. What we would have is that the PMIN block would be shrunk from 100 megawatts to 83.33 megawatts. And then the first incremental block would be 50 times 5/6, which is 41.67. And you would run both of those. You would run the PMIN block would run 83.33. That first incremental block that was offered at a $40 price would be run at its full 41.67. The total of those two would be the 125 megawatts that is being produced under this, as you can see in this example. So you get the same outcome. So you could have gone ahead and replaced my single PMIN block in this example with the with the structure of this unit in some of the previous examples, you would have gotten the same result. It would have gone from, you would commit this unit to run 5/6, and it would run at its shrunken P-min plus the shrunken first incremental block would both be fully dispatched, and the shrunken second incremental block would not be dispatched at all in this example.
Okay. I understand the mechanism now, but it's really counterintuitive that you're sort of thinking like things are stacking up, but when you partially commit a unit, you can actually pick sections of its. Okay.
Well, you don't pick sections; it's just shrunken, and so you can't dispatch the first incremental part without dispatching the P-min part. But you would choose to dispatch both of those because. Having dispatched the P-min, it also, you want to take that nice cheap $40 energy from the incremental part as well. So
okay, that's a good way to think about it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to slide 30 then, unless there's any other questions.
No other questions, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay. Operating reserve. Now you can get different answers. What we've got below here is. I assume that we're going to have our load decrease to 575, but we also have an operating reserve schedule of 30. So we need a total of 605 megawatts that is scheduled to do something or other. What would happen if we did this? Well, the first thing we would do is, the fast start generator, it would be committed. It has to run at least 150 megawatts. That means we have to back G1 down even further, all the way down to 425. And then secondly, 30 megawatts of OR. Well, who's going to provide that? Well, G1 could provide it, and I've scheduled it in this example. I've assumed that it does, but that decision on my part was totally arbitrary. I could have also scheduled the fast start generator to produce 30 megawatts of operating reserve. It's got 50 megawatts of undispatched capacity. I could have done that. In fact, I could have even scheduled G2 to provide operating reserve, right? I haven't assumed, I'm kind of simplistically assuming that it's available for its full 500 megawatts, even though it's not running. So it could provide operating reserve. Any of the generators could have provided operating reserve. So that's my dispatch. This is what's actually coming out. These are the physical instructions that are being sent out. Now let's think about pricing. Let's go to the next slide, please. If we use the modified offer curve, what's going to happen here? Well, this is essentially the same example that we've gone through before. I have a $60 modified offer curve for the P-min block of the fast start generator, and that's going to be on the margin. So the LMP is going to be $60. The price of operating reserve, it's 0, because what would happen if the operating reserve schedule was 31 as opposed to 30? The requirement went up to 31. Well, somebody will provide additional operating reserve. It could be anybody. So it doesn't increase the cost. Therefore, if you can meet an incremental requirement, megawatt of operating reserve requirement without having to incur any cost, the price of operating reserve is going to be 0. So we have a $60 price for energy and a 0 price for operating reserve using the modified offer curve approach for fast start pricing. Next slide. If we relax the energy constraint, well, this gets a little bit hairy. But the general concept is that you go ahead and you commit this unit. It was committed to produce, you had committed 52.5% of this unit. Why did 52.5% come from? Well, I need 605 megawatts of resources available. I've got 575 of load, another 30 megawatts of operating reserve. A total of 605 megawatts has to be available. G1 produces 500. So I need another 105 megawatts. So what this does is it says I'm going to go, 105 out of the 200 megawatts that are available from the fast start generator, 105 over 200 is 0.525, 52.5%. So what would happen under the integer constraint relaxation approach is that we would commit 52.5% of this unit. And so you can see the kind of funky looking schedules you get out if you commit 52.5% of it. That means that it can produce 78.75 megawatts of energy with that P-min block. It has 26.25 megawatts of capacity on its incremental block. That provides operating reserve. G1 is dispatched to 496.25. Everything works out. The math works out. We actually get 575 megawatts of energy and 30 megawatts of operating reserve. Now, where do our prices come from? Well, if we needed additional load, we would actually commit the fast start generator. Its commitment would go up by from 0.525 to 0.53. And that would let it produce an additional 0.75 megawatts. And then we would also dispatch G1 up to produce another 0.25 megawatts. And that means we've got a total of 1 additional megawatt hour being produced. That costs us $55.50 to do that if you run through the math, which I've got up there, and I won't do it right here and now. If we had an increase in the operating reserve requirement, and this is really the key part here, we would also get a positive price because, again, right now, the way things are, and that pricing dispatch you see below, we've got a total of 605 megawatts of resources that are being committed between G1 and the fast start generator, okay? If we had an increase in the operating reserve requirement, what we would do is we would go ahead and we would increase the value of that fast start generator's commitment variable from 0.525 to 0.53. And so we get an LMP of $13.50 for operating reserve. Next slide. Again, neither of these prices are going to clear markets. It's a little bit difficult to, so what would happen is that the modified offer approach, we don't have any BCR payments, but G1 does have lost opportunity costs. And so it gets a lost opportunity cost payment because it's saying, gee, it is $60 LMP. I haven't been fully dispatched. I've only been dispatched to 425 megawatts. I wish I'd been dispatched higher. I wish I'd gotten that other 75 megawatts dispatched. I lost $18 per megawatt hour in profits. So I have a $1,350 bid cost recovery payment that I need. What about the integer constraint relaxation approach? Well, we don't have BCR payments, okay? Excuse me, we do have BCR payments, but they're somewhat lower. At 5550, LMP means that the G1 still has BCR payments that it's due, but they're smaller than they otherwise would have been. Then also, we have lost opportunity costs. And this is an issue here because G1 is saying, well, I lost some opportunities here. The G2 also wishes that it would, everybody wishes they've been scheduled to provide operating reserve. Problem is that we have a positive operating reserve price of 1550, excuse me, of what's the price? 1350. And so everybody wishes they'd gone ahead and been scheduled to do that. So this is the problem that we have when when this arises. Can you go to the next slide here? Yeah. The price of operating reserve is positive under the energy constraint relaxation approach because it only commits enough capacity to meet load and the operating reserve requirement, which means when you increase the operating reserve requirement, you have to increase the value of the commitment variable, and that's costly. So we get positive prices for operating reserve pricing under the integer constraint relaxation approach. Next slide, please. But the problem is that we have plenty of capacity on all 3 generators that can provide operating reserve. So if we're not going to pay people for lost opportunity costs, they may have an incentive to take actions and try to ensure they are scheduled to provide operating reserve. If you have a situation where, G1 and G2 and the fast start generator all wish they had been scheduled to provide operating reserve because they went ahead and we have a price of $13.50 for people to do that. And it frankly randomly could have been any of them in this example. Well, whoever didn't get it, whoever has been essentially left without a seat in the game of this musical chairs, is wishing they'd had a seat. And so we've given people an incentive to go ahead and take actions that could be inefficient. So that's the problem with that I see, is that we may be getting essentially operating reserve pricing that reflects a shortage of operating reserve in the pricing pass, even though we don't actually have a shortage in the dispatch pass, which means that we may have the strange situation where we're paying people for operating reserve, even though we actually have plenty of operating reserve freely available. And it really doesn't matter who we schedule in the dispatch pass to provide operating reserve. So that's a concern that I see with respect to the relaxation of integer constraints approach as opposed to the modified offer curve approach. Next slide. Or am I finished with this section? Yeah, I'm finished with that section. Were there any other questions on that? I'm sorry if I'm rushing here, but I see the time.
No, it's all right, Mike. I appreciate
Yeah.
it, and I'll have to own putting you in that position. No further questions. Please go ahead.
All right. This is a short section. The last one has something to do with offline fast start generators and whether they should be allowed to set prices, whether their offer should be considered. Let's go to the next slide here. So as James was mentioning, in some ISOs and RTOs, offline fast start generators can, like as I said, they can be started quickly. They're fast start generators, of course they can. They can be, their offers can be considered in the pricing dispatch under certain circumstances. The rules vary from ISO to ISO, but they can be considered in the pricing dispatch as used to set LMPs, even though they're not online. And I know that one with the, in particular, when the PJM IMM was presenting, they presented their opinion that should be allowed only when the fast start generator is actually able to start and is economic. And I think that's mostly right, but I think it's, in my view, a little bit oversimplified. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example that's going to go ahead and illustrate my concern here. So let's go to the next slide here. So here I've got an example of 3 generators. This one, the fast start generator, is very simple. It's a 100 megawatt Pmax and Pmin. So either your choices are don't run me or run me at 100 megawatts. Those are the 2 options. We've also got G1, which is, again, my nice 500 megawatt, $35 per megawatt hour cheap unit. And I've got G2, which is 100 megawatts available at the low price of $500 per megawatt hour. And by the way, I should mention, if you happen to download this presentation yesterday, I had loaded the wrong table onto this slide, so you may not be seeing the table that is on the screen in front of you right now. It's not that different, but it's a little bit different. So just to let you know, in case you're wondering why what you see on paper might not match what you see electronically. So G2 is offered energy at the low price of $500, and nevertheless, the least cost dispatch is to go ahead and run this generator to produce 5 megawatts. Why? Because I've assumed the load is just above G1's capacity. It's 505 megawatts. And so if I were to start the FSG, it has to run 100 megawatts, which means that I'd have to back G1 from 500 all the way down to 405 megawatts. And that's costly. It's, it's costing me $25 per megawatt hour for every megawatt that the fast start generator produces and G1 doesn't produce. Multiply that by 95 megawatts, it turns out that it's just a little bit cheaper to actually run G2, even at $500 a megawatt hour, to meet load. So this is our least cost dispatch when we have just a little bit more load than G1 could beat. And the alternatives are either the expensive but flexible G2 or the less expensive but inflexible fast start generator. So what you can get in this situation is that it makes sense not to start the fast start generator. It makes sense to go ahead and say that the G2 is going to start. Now, in this case, if you say that offline generators cannot participate in pricing unless they're economic to start, well, the fast start generator is not economic to start. That's why it's not starting. It's not economic to start. So if you adopt that approach, you're going to get an LMP in this example of $500, G2's bid. Whereas if you let the fast start generator, its offers be considered in pricing, you're going to get an LMP of $60 per megawatt hour. So a big difference. Let's take a look at the next slide here. Now I've assumed load went up to 510. Well, that's all we needed. Now it makes sense to start the fast start generator. Even though we have to back G1 down to 410, which still costs a lot, it's still worth the trade-off at this point. And so So this means that once the load goes up to 510, we would start the fast start generator. It would be online. It would start to set prices, and the LMP would fall to $60. So we have this kind of unusual situation here where, part of the rationale for fast start pricing was that otherwise you see situations where loads going up and up and the prices are going down. Well, they're going down because when you start a fast start generator, and if it's got a segment that's not allowed to participate in pricing, you back off some other more flexible unit, but a cheaper unit, it's setting the price. And so we could easily see situations, and often see situations, where load goes up and we're running expensive generation, but none of it's actually marginal if you don't have fast start pricing. And so our prices are not reflecting that fact. Our prices are actually going down when load goes up. Here, we have the same thing happening. We have the price going, when the load's 505, the price is 500. If the load goes up to 510, the price goes down to 60. So if you don't let offline units participate in pricing, you can get kind of odd situations like this, which can call into question, well, okay, how is this really reasonable to have that $500 price spike that then, once the load goes up a little bit, the price then falls back down to $60? Is this really sort of a valuable signal to the market, demonstrating what you should be doing, that if you're a load, you should be getting yourself prepared to get off the system because the prices are $500 and that's not worth it to you? If you're an external transaction, let's go ahead and get some power flowing in here because we're getting paid $500 per megawatt hour. So there's a question about whether this is letting this happen produces really a kind of a valuable price signal. But next slide. If you don't let it happen, then what you're doing is you're undermining incentives for people to develop capacity that can go ahead and help mitigate these price spikes. And so I was thinking about a battery, and I should have written battery in the table as opposed to G2. So let's suppose we've got a battery and it's available to inject energy and it wants $100 per megawatt to do that. Well, if it was available, it would be running. We wouldn't be dispatching the $500 per megawatt hour G2. We'd be dispatching that $100 per megawatt hour battery instead. So in a situation like that, what's happening is, if we don't let the offline units participate in fast start pricing, we're letting prices go to levels that can help incent the development and help support the resources like a battery. Whereas if we let the offline fast start generators units participate in price setting, we're effectively capping prices. We're basically saying, well, this guy's not actually running, but he's got a $60 bid. We're going to continue to use it. We're going to consider it to be eligible for pricing. It's effectively capping the price, which means that you may not be getting prices that are high enough to go ahead and help, in this case, this battery that wants to operate only if it's getting $100 per megawatt hour. It doesn't want to actually get going. So to the extent that letting offline units participate in fast start pricing effectively mutes the actual volatility of prices, what it does is it basically inhibits the development of resources that can make those price spikes go away, or at least lessen their intensity. So that's the downside of this. So I think that I think that if for some reason you said you couldn't have such resources, or that no such resources could exist, that would be, then you'd be saying, gee, does it really make sense to have prices go to 500? But when you're taking into account the fact that suppressing prices in this way by letting the offline resources participate in the setting of fast start prices may help. Once you go ahead and take that factor into account, it makes more sense to go ahead and essentially say that, what, if we don't let offline resources participate in fast start pricing, that's actually going to be an outcome that will make more sense. If we actually have resources that can come in, like the battery in this example, and help mitigate price spikes that otherwise would be created if you didn't have resources like that. And so that's all I've got, I think.
Thanks, Mike. No, I appreciate that. Couple of questions coming in. Let's go to Alva first. Alva, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, Mike. Can you hear me? Great. Just one thing that occurs to me is that some of your examples could be used to make a different argument in that potentially you could get some of the same, or you do get some of the same benefits in real markets just by virtue of certain kinds of uncertainty existing inherently in the market, and that as you point out, very small in an optimization, very small changes in demand can lead to different solutions. But in fact, uh, market participants have to look at a range of possible outcomes, which generally aren't those edge cases. And similarly, on the issue of the battery, I think there's a question of, it's generally a battery bid is based on an opportunity cost, and it's an opportunity cost that is based on forecast prices. And so, to the extent that there's uncertainty in that, that can mitigate some of the effects that you're talking about in terms of in particular this particular argument that you'd actually need to represent offline opportunities in order to get more efficient resources to come into the mix.
Yeah, well, I think I'd say that, yeah, I understand, the examples are kind of simplified to make a point, but I do think the general lesson is valid to say that to the extent that we have offline resources like the $60 fast start generator, this example, that it can set price even when it's offline, that is effectively going to limit the amount of price volatility that would otherwise occur. It's going to go ahead and that is in turn going to discourage the development of resources that can reduce that price volatility, because they will actually be able to produce 5 megawatts in this example when we had 505 megawatts of load.
Yeah, if we're only dealing with just this one situation, I think your case would work. But if you're looking at it over a period of time, presumably that, and I'm just trying, once one injects even a little bit of reality into these scenarios, I think it gets questionable. Like the offline resource, it's there because it's needed some of the time, right? And so
if that battery's there, it's there, and whenever that we happen to hit that edge case where we're just above 500 megawatts, whether it's 502 or 503 or 505, where it doesn't make sense to start the fast start generator because the P-min is too big and we just need a little bit of energy, that battery's there and it's ready to, and it's sitting there ready to inject energy whenever we get a price that makes sense for it to do so. And we're more likely to get those situations if we don't have the fast start generator essentially ensuring that prices never reach levels that make sense for the battery to run.
I will mull that over. Thank you.
And then we have one more left for you, Mike, here. David, let's go ahead and unmute David, please.
Hi.
Speak. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Storage. So just to continue with that battery situation, as I understand, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Great job. It went by very quickly, so I'm not sure I've fully got all of it. The fast start generator on slide 40, if that was a battery, that would have an ability to absorb 100 megawatts, which under some nomenclature you consider P-min, so minus 100 to plus 100, and able to step in immediately at any of those levels. So that really changes the scenario. If I was looking at this as a battery developer, and that fast start generator was a physical asset with Pmax and Pmin of 100, I would have to consider the impact on the pricing if I deployed my battery of changing those numbers to minus 100 Pmin plus 100 Pmax and willing to step in anywhere along that range. And as I projected the prices that I'd see for the battery, I'd have to take that into account because that would be the reality of how I'd be participating in the market. So I'm not exactly sure where this ends up with the numbers, but I think just the mere presence of the battery in the grid, particularly in California, where you have a huge number of batteries in the grid, is going to materially change what happens with some of these edge cases.
Yeah, I think that is why Well, let's put it this, yeah, I mean, it's, I'd have to think about exactly how to, what would happen if I modified the example to think about a battery that's gonna be starting to charge. I mean, what I'm thinking about really is, again, and this goes back to some of our previous discussions, that probably fast start pricing is gonna have by far more impact in hours in which the battery is discharging. And so what I was trying to illustrate here was that is the impact of fast start generator on of offline pricing of in prices in hours when the battery is going to be discharging. I don't know that it would really have that much of an impact on hours when the battery is expected to charge, because those are probably not hours in which the fast start generator, whether it's offline or not, is probably going to be economic.
Yeah, the other impact of the battery is it basically takes that fast start generator of 100 Pmax Pmin, and if it's a battery of 100 megawatts that is also sitting effectively offline or standby, it's going to effectively mute the impact of that fast start generator, I think, because the battery is willing to step in anywhere from, if we just consider putting energy on the grid, 0 to 100.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not following why would I expect, and maybe I'm not understanding, but I don't know why I don't expect the battery to be charging in this hour. So I'm not sure why lowering the Pmin to minus 100 would really matter, because it's probably not going to want to be purchasing.
Yeah. David,
well, my
point
think, is just if you had the battery, of Pmax 100, Pmin 0, so we're only considering its ability to discharge into the grid. But if it was sitting standby, I think it effectively mutes the impact of the FSG that you've got there. And if you're planning to deploy the battery and you're projecting what the analysis of the grid's going to be, effectively it's as if that physical FSG isn't there.
Well, I think it will depend upon the price at which it needs to the price it requires to discharge. In this example, I've assumed 100. I just made it up. If I'd assumed it was 50, it would have muted the FSG. The FSG wouldn't matter.
Yeah, and battery costs are largely upfront CapEx.
Sure.
The OpEx is relatively small. It's just the wear and tear in the battery.
No, I understand. It's just you're taking your injection costs plus round trip losses, and and having to take account some sort of amount of variable O&M, take account of degradation and such. But
yeah, and I think as mentioned earlier, we are going to explore that interplay with storage. So I think we'll have time for this conversation in a later session. Mike, I appreciate you giving us your time. Sorry to have compressed your time frame here. I know we're running a little bit over. I did want to address one thing really quickly, a comment that we got in the chat, which kind of dovetails into how we'll be exploring interactions with storage later. We got a comment that we need to consider the pros and cons of fast start pricing and its interactions with other market features. That is on our schedule. In fact, we're having dedicated sessions for each one of those different market features. So, Mike, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, but if not, I'll go ahead and let's see if you have any closing thoughts here, Mike.
I'm ready to release everybody. I've already kept you an extra 17 minutes. So.
Well, we sincerely appreciate your time and giving us your thoughts on both of the presentations from the previous sessions, and to the stakeholders. We sincerely appreciate your engagement. Good conversation throughout this whole session. So, Brenda, I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to you to close.
Thank you, everyone, for patiently waiting and taking great questions right now from Michael. So we will have this call recorded and posted shortly, early next week on Tuesday. Monday's a holiday here at the ISO. We also want to invite you that there's a few notices going out tomorrow for CR enhancements, as well as the customer partnership group that we do monthly for congestion revenue rights settlement upgrade projects. So want to give folks enough time to look at that coming up for next week and the other week before that. So there's also this price formation enhancements page that we update those up to presentations that we're discussing today's meeting. We also plan to update the other common template for the scarcity pricing. So we will keep everyone informed on that with a notice. And then if any updates come further for upcoming meetings, we'll plan to send a notice out, but most likely the team will be kind of checking on the next schedule, next steps for meetings, because there is a few other working groups coming along. And so we want to make sure we don't conflict with their meetings as well. And now, just like a quick reminder, Energy Blog Matters here at the ISO has just launched the Blue Sky social media platform. It does not replace any existing social media related posts, so we will be utilizing that as another way for those who want to follow us. And there has been great material posted there, along with the stuff that we provide in during notices. But notices are the best way to keep in communication with these upcoming meetings. As well, click on relevant notices on the ISO calendar for any updates. And at this time, I don't have any more updates or anything here, but we really appreciate everyone's patience, and we look forward to speaking with you on the next price formation enhancement meeting. I'll send it back to my event producer to close this call. Thank you.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using Inteller Event Services. You may now disconnect.